Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. Whether you're tuning in from the Great American Bash or halfway around the world, we've got a jam-packed episode for you. Get ready to dive into wrestling's rich history, packed with insights, opinions, and a few surprises. And remember, you can skip to your favorite moments with our chapter markers. Let's jump right into it. June 26, 2000 Observer Newsletter, Birth of Noah. Vince Russo quits WCW. Dave Meltzer. Mitsuharu Misawa announced officially the formation of his new promotion. Nippon TV officially announced cancellation of the All Japan television show, and Toshiaki Kawada talked about attempting to go to New Japan, were highlights of the aftermath of the All Japan split. Misawa held his press conference on June 16 at DIFA Ariake, the new building in the Ariake suburb of Tokyo, which was built specifically for pro wrestling to replace Korakuen Hall as the small show mecca in the Tokyo area, and which, ironically enough, has its first show on July 1 booked by the All Japan promotion. Misawa portrayed his split publicly using the 1972 analogy of when Shohei Baba left the failing Japanese Wrestling Alliance, which had been the dominant promotion for nearly 2 decades and was the group of Rikidozen, to form All Japan. He said he was unable to make changes from the traditional approach favored by Motoko Baba. He compared it to Shohei Baba attempting to modernize pro wrestling with the formation of All Japan. The new group's name, which has not been officially announced, but it is believed will be called Noah, will debut with a show in August and run its first tour in October. As expected, virtually the entire roster of the All Japan promotion, both in front of and behind the scenes, as well as Nippon TV, were at Misawa's corner in the split, which for all practical purposes was agreed upon going back probably as much as 1 year ago. Besides Toshiaki Kawada and Masafuchi, only referee Kyohei Wada, who is the ref with the huge cult following that gets the huge pop at the start of every Budokan Hall main event, and 2 members of the board of directors stayed with Baba's promotion. Kawada's decision is believed to be largely due to 2 related factors. When word of the split started getting out, New Japan sent Shiro Koshinaka, who started his career with Kawada in All Japan in the early 80s, for a meeting with Kawada in February. Kawada, who is still suffering from double vision in one eye, was thought to have only a limited time left in his career under any circumstances, and thus working only a limited big show schedule would prolong his career and maximize his drawing power on the way out. Koshinaka proposed a Genichiro Tenryu-like role for him, where he could work New Japan major shows as All Japan president and perhaps bringing the Triple Crown to New Japan Dome shows for dream singles matches against the top draws in the company like Keiji Muto, Masahiro Chono and Shinya Hashimoto on Dome shows for huge paydays in the outsider role that both Tenryu and Nobuhiko Takada drew huge money with, and that New Japan understands better how to promote than any promotion in the world. By June 20th, Tokyo Sports ran a front-page story on the possibility of a Hashimoto vs. Kawada Dome match. When the Dream Singles program ends, they also could set up Tenryu and Kawada, who were a great tag team in the late 80s with All Japan, reuniting against various New Japan teams for more big matches. In return, New Japan may help All Japan at least struggle to remain alive, similar as they did for many years with Tenryu's failing war promotion and to a lesser extent Takada's UWFI. At this point it doesn't look like that will be the case for the next tour. History also shows the end result of these alliances is the destruction of the smaller group, but in this case, that's probably a moot point because the group for all real purposes at this point without network television would have nothing going for it but whatever interpromotional business can be drawn up. Aside from Kawada and Fuchi and one of All Japan's 4 referees, Wada, who both signed new contracts with All Japan on June 15, the only major star with the former All Japan office who wasn't at the Misawa press conference was Hiroshi, who is working in the Japanese Diet Senate, but has aligned himself with Misawa as well. Motoko Baba also held a press conference on June 16, announcing that Steve Williams, Johnny Ace, Mike Barton, Johnny Smith, 2 Cold Scorpio, Giant Kimala 2 and Monakia Mossman would join Kawada and Fuchi, and that the scheduled July tour would take place. Stan Hansen will also be brought in only for the July 23 show at Budokan Hall. A few days later it was announced that Wolf Hockfield would join the crew for the entire tour. Vader, who is out of action until August with a series of major injuries, also at this point is aligned with All Japan. The attitude of the foreign wrestlers is to wait and see. Since most of the foreigners were not involved in the Misawa/Motoko Baba dispute and their business dealings were through the office, their loyalties lied with Shohei Baba and at this point are siding with Motoko, but without television, it is questionable how long Motoko will try and hang on while still paying the large salaries the foreigners command, at which point the wrestlers would likely all wind up with Misawa's group. Motoko Baba claimed that Misawa didn't work hard as company president over the past year and that he had been planning to leave for some time. She also talked about a $1 million loan Misawa had taken out, and then quickly repaid, for the company, saying the fact he repaid it so quickly at the time was also proof of his intention to leave. She invited the 26 people who were aligned with Misawa, Kenta Kobashi, Jun Akiyama, Takao Mori, Akira Taue, Yoshinari Ogawa, Mitsuo Momoto, Rusher Kimura, Haruka Eigen, Yoshihiro Takayama, Jun Izumida, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, Masao Inoue, Tamon Honda, Satoru Asako, Kentaro Shiga, Yoshinobu Kanemaru, Masamichi Marufuji, Takeshi Morishima, Makoto Hashi, Takeshi Rikyo, Kena Kobayashi, Daisuke Ikeda, Masahito Kakihara, and referee Mighty Inoue, to work the July tour, and said the company wouldn't announce the lineups for the new tour until after hearing from Misawa. This was a political move, just as Misawa had made, to babyface the promotion in the fans' eyes that even though the wrestlers left, she was trying to do everything to book strong cards for the July tour. Misawa said no comment about the proposal. On June 19, Kawada changed the request only to have Misawa and company work 4 of the house shows on the tour: July 13 in Matsuyama, July 15 in Nanao, July 16 in Toyama, and July 20 at Hakata Star Lanes in Fukuoka, and not including the big Budokan Hall show, because they are sold shows to local promoters. Posters with Misawa's photos advertising the shows are already around those cities, and tickets for those events have started being sold. The company would be leaving with bad will since the local promoters, when buying the show, expected the full crew. Kawada also announced that for fans who had already purchased tickets to any of the July shows, if they wish to return the tickets based on the biggest stars not being there, even though none of the names were specifically advertised, people buying tickets would be under the impression they would be there. They can get a full refund. All Japan has also asked Yoshiaki Fujiwara, Nobutaka Araya, Shigeo Okamura, Geto, Jado, and Jinsei Shinzaki to join for the next tour. Kawada on June 19 announced he would be joining with New Japan, and that Shinzaki of Michinoku Pro and independent wrestler Okamura, who had worked some prelims for All Japan in the past, had agreed to work, but the others hadn't as a press time. All Japan is hopeful of running shows with 16 wrestlers, and at press time had 11 confirmed. He also said that Mossman, who is a native Hawaiian but who has worked from right out of high school with All Japan, would work on the Japanese side. Kobashi and Honda are using the break to both undergo knee operations that both have been putting off due to the Japanese mentality of gutting it out, particularly in the case of Kobashi, who, like Misawa, was seen as an indispensable part of the live show crew, even though both are terribly banged up from their legendary in-ring wars. Kobashi had his knees thoroughly checked out on June 21. It was determined he needed surgery on his right knee from all the years of doing moonsaults at his 260-pound body weight, and it was expected he'd undergo surgery later in the week so he'd be able to return for the new group's opening in August. At a press conference on June 19, NTV announced that its final All Japan television show would be on June 21 after broadcasting the show for 28 years. The show would be a 45-minute special which would include both All Japan matches and NTV's explanation as to why it was canceling the show due to the promotional split. While a shock to the general public, that has been known by insiders for as long as 1 year, and that Misawa starting his group was delayed for the past year largely due to NTV's not wanting to cancel Baba's television within a year of Baba's death because it would look bad publicly after the 28-year affiliation, because to many older fans, NTV and Giant Baba signify one and the same thing. They announced in the time slot starting on June 28 would be a sports news show called Coliseum, which would concentrate on news about Misawa's group to build for its debut, along with news about K1, since NTV broadcasts that promotion as well, and other martial arts fighting news. Misawa's promotion is expected to get the weekly time slot when it starts running full-time in October. NTV, which began broadcasting pro wrestling in 1954 and drew some of the largest ratings in the history of Japanese television for Rikidozan's matches against the likes of Luthez, the Destroyer, and Fred Blassie, and later in the 60s for Baba's matches with the likes of Bobo Brazil, Bruno Sammartino, Gene Kiniski, Fritz von Erich, and the Crusher, made a similar call in 1972 when Baba, the biggest star of the JWA, left the promotion, which folded a few months later, forming All Japan. The crux of the problems, as mentioned last week, were both financial as well as creative, with Motoko Baba resisting all changes and upgrades. All Japan wrestlers are paid monthly on a per-match basis. While job security in the group is tremendous, as the company has the best reputation in the business of taking care of its older wrestlers, usually into their 50s, which is why few native wrestlers leave, and Misawa wanted to increase the pay to the wrestlers and give them medical benefits, but Baba nixed the changes. He also wanted to modernize the product to make it more entertaining for new fans, but Baba wanted to remain as the last promotion in the world doing the old style. When Misawa was named president last year, he paid Motoko Baba $500,000 per year in salary for her position in the company, the same salary level her husband carried, in an attempt to keep her happy and allow him to make changes in the business, but it didn't work out that way. Even though All Japan somewhat struggled at the gate this past year, the company was still turning a profit, but the money wasn't reinvested in the company, and Baba would not allow Misawa to offer any raises when contracts expired at the end of March, which is why none of the wrestlers were offered new deals by Misawa. Even so, everything that took place this past week, with the exception of the Kawada/New Japan deal, which talks probably dated back to February, was well established going back probably 1 year. The trial to determine the television landscape of American wrestling continued this past week, with most of the news reports seemingly favoring the WWF and Viacom. With the trial just about complete and closing arguments set for just after press time, Judge William Chandler late in the week suggested that Viacom, WWF and the USA Network come to a settlement because one side probably wouldn't like his ultimate decision. The basic issue of the case, which somewhat irrelevant issues have muddled, were if the clause in WWF's contract with USA Network giving the network the right to match any competing bid for WWF programming could be interpreted as matching a bid for the entire package of WWF programming or simply matching the bid for the specific individual television shows in question. Raw on Monday, Live Wire on Saturday, and Superstars and Heat on Sunday. USA Network's case was that they only had to match the bids for the individual television shows, and not the complete package Viacom offered, which included additional television specials, producing a new drama and possible television series produced by the WWF, as well as synergistic product advertising on radio stations and theme parks, and a book publishing deal through Viacom-owned Simon & Schuster. What hurt their case was testimony from USA Network Chief Counsel Richard Lynn that USA did a detailed financial analysis in March of matching the entire Viacom-CBS bid, showing that they themselves, at least at that point, presumably felt they needed to match it to maintain the programming. After running the numbers, USA Network figured if it matched the bid for all the programming, there were aspects of the bid, such as the book publishing deal, that USA Network couldn't match as they don't own a publishing house. It would lose $6.79 million next season, $6.6 million over the second season, and $4.96 million over the third season of the deal, which would run from September 2000 through August of 2005. After running the numbers, USA didn't match the bid. Lynn tried to downplay this study, saying he never paid any attention to the analysis, claiming they matched what he thought they needed to match. USA Network agreed to Viacom's offer of $26 million per year, increase from $5.2 million for the Raw, Live Wire, Superstars and Heat show. Viacom's offers, which USA didn't match, also included $3.5 million for several TV specials, a $600,000 production fee for a WWF drama series to air on UPN, a $500,000 script development fund for new ideas for WWF-produced television shows, and an $8 million marketing budget to promote the shift of the Raw, Live Wire and Superstars shows to TNN and the Heat show to MTV. Under any circumstances, due to the nature of what the fee is earmarked for, USA shouldn't have to match the $8 million marketing fee to inform the public of the station switch if there is no station shift, while matching the other figures is the heart of the entire case. There is also serious talk of fairly regular WWF TV specials airing on CBS. Vince McMahon testified that the USA Network did virtually nothing for the WWF, complained that USA greatly underpaid for the programming. Viacom's offer of 5 times the amount for the same programming backed up his claim. He also complained about USA Network preempting the show every year for the US Open Tennis and for the Westminster Dog Show, claiming it was stupid and archaic, and that nobody watches those shows. The reality is the Dog Show, up until the past 3 years, generally drew a higher rating than Raw, and as a one-time deal is far more valuable because it brought in substantially more advertising revenue to USA because it appealed to a more lucrative demographic than WWF wrestling. The US Open was one of USA's plum prestige events over a 3-week period. While the US Open never came close to Raw's ratings on Mondays, it also had a more favorable demographic profile to advertisers. McMahon also complained that USA Network execs snickered at him when he asked to buy into the Sci-Fi Channel and help program it. However, court documents did reveal that USA Network President Stephen Zhao proposed launching a new station they would call the Man Cable Channel, based around WWF wrestling and the XFL. In what many people are reading many different ways, Vince Russo quit his position as television writer for WCW on June 15. It was largely believed in the company that he would return, so publicly it was stated that he was taking a few days off due to a concussion. Russo, who didn't return calls to just about everyone in the company wanting to hear his side of things, was scheduled for a meeting this week after press time with Brad Siegel regarding his future with the company. Russo quit largely over a disagreement with management, in particular Eric Bischoff, who wanted to bring Kimberly, Elizabeth, and Lex Luger back to television. Russo felt all had quit rather than go along with his scripts, Kimberly and Elizabeth, for a variety of reasons having to do with storyline and treatment, but ultimately because they didn't want to take bumps as participants in wrestling matches because they weren't trained as wrestlers. While most feel both were unnecessary in the grand scheme of things, and Elizabeth, whose rumored salary is in excess of $300,000 per year, was ridiculously overpaid and was living on the fact she was a big deal in wrestling a decade ago but had long outlived whatever nostalgia value she brought to the company, the fact is she didn't sign a contract to be a participant in matches. Kimberly was generally not liked backstage, with people thinking she was turning into the next Sable, but others felt her acting was good by the standards of a wrestling show. She was given lots of TV time, and she does have a great look. Luger had complained repeatedly about how he was being used, and eventually had a blow-up last week where he refused to do an angle Russo had scheduled for him. While many wrestlers had varying degrees of confidence in Russo's ability, the bottom line is that if the wrestlers refused to do his scripts, even if he was the second coming, he'd be a failure, and by this time a strong message had to be sent to one of the top performers, and failure for management to back up Russo would have been disastrous for him in a company where the top wrestlers have routinely protected their turf and sabotaged promising newcomers from reaching the top. Management apparently was of the belief that since Luger had several years left on a very lucrative deal and the company is losing so much money, it couldn't be corporately justified in not using him while he was healthy and being paid such a high salary. However, that decision-making theory ultimately leaves any booker with no power to turn the company around. The only thing that some were saying is, why pick on Luger when Hogan and Nash were the real dressing room problems in their ability to even fool management, and some wrestlers that they are putting people over were more detrimental to the team atmosphere and newcomers getting a push. Both had fooled less wrestling astute, and even some who were wrestling astute, people that they had put people over by taking pinfalls in the past, in matches where clearly their opponents were far worse off for beating them, with Billy Kidman being the prime example of a newcomer who got no rub from his supposed career-making program with Hogan and probably came out of it the same if not worse than before the program started. If Luger was brought back, Russo's power would be diminished, and he'd be seen by everyone as just another in the long line of bookers the company has had that will be quickly replaced, and the wrestlers would continue only doing what they perceive as best for themselves. Russo was also unhappy with standards and practices editing so much out of the Thunder show, which aired the previous night, in particular language taken from the movie Deliverance, a movie that the station would and has aired without editing that same language out. After the word broke of Russo quitting, those within the company quietly confirmed it, but the company's official line is that Russo was taking a few days off and that Bischoff was totally behind bringing him back. However, it is known that Bischoff was starting to listen to many who believed that the show needed more wrestling content and less angles and run-ins involving untrained talent, particularly since, with all the talk about how long it would take to turn around ratings, it doesn't take long to turn around live show attendance, merchandise business and buy rates, and none were occurring. It was generally believed for most of the week that Russo would return. Terry Taylor, Bill Banks and Ed Ferrara wrote Nitro and Thunder with some outside help, and were given the parameters of not to make any drastic changes or new angles because Russo would be back in the role. If Russo actually were to quit, unlike in January where he was asked to be a part of a committee and refused, saying that isn't what his contract stated and he was able to sit home and be paid, he'd be giving up a lucrative multi-year contract. Those in the company felt that as hot-headed as he might be and frustrated with the situation, ultimately with a new home in Atlanta and 3 children and what were perceived as no other options in wrestling, with the belief that Vince McMahon doesn't need him and wouldn't want him, that his options were limited. After Nitro, his situation seemed a little more muddled. There are those who felt Russo was playing a game, a power play of sorts, figuring that with Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, Sting and Diamond Dallas Page not available on the show, plus going against the NBA playoffs, that it was the perfect week to take off knowing the ratings were going to fall. Others even felt this was all a work designed to build a Monday rating, but when WCW denied it publicly and came up with the time off for a concussion story, that pretty well confirmed this wasn't an angle. From other sources, we can pretty well guarantee this wasn't an angle. However, the timing on everything as it pertains to the editing of Thunder and the decisions to bring back talent he didn't want seems to make the expected ratings drop more of a timing coincidence than a calculated reason for taking a week off. The general feeling in the company was that Nitro was stronger than most of the shows he wrote and conceptually was a far stronger product without his crash TV formula. They eliminated run-ins, which put more emphasis on the matches, which came off more like matches and less like garbled garbage in between badly acted skits. They made the show far less busy, which resulted in a less numbing broadcast where angles had the potential to be able to start to take hold. The bad characters getting pushed, Chronic, Stasiak, and Palumbo, Shiner and Abbott, were still bad characters. The only real storyline angle, G.I. Bro leaving the Misfits and going back to Booker T, reversing an angle Russo had started just weeks earlier, was seen almost unanimously as a positive. The wrestling quality, while nowhere close to the level of Raw, was the best Nitro has been, in particular bringing back talent like the Young Dragons and 3 Count, who were putting on the best matches in the circuit before Russo came and took them all off television, and giving 10 minutes for the Jeff Jarrett vs. Scott Steiner title match as the TV main event. The rating of 2.75 was roughly what the average was of shows in Russo's current reign, none of which went against competition as strong as the NBA Finals over the second hour and none of which had such limited marquee power. In addition, with Bill Goldberg getting such a huge babyface reaction, by far the biggest of anyone on the show, that once again brought second-guessing into Russo's decision of turning him and made this look almost like the repeat of the mistake of the Sting turn. There don't appear to be any plans of turning Goldberg back, but some were already conceding Goldberg's role, instead of being a heel, will be more as a tweener, which in his case, means he'll quickly end up as a babyface unless he stands next to Bischoff or Russo. Some of Russo's supporters, after what was conceded as a good but not great show, were saying that Russo was right in his beliefs regarding bringing Luger and the others back, but thought he was immature with walking out and the nature of how he was handling the situation. The loss of Russo would also destroy his strongest angle to date with the Ric Flair head shaving, which was barely acknowledged on the Nitro the week after it happened. An estimated 5,000 people attended the public funeral on June 18 for Tomomi Jumbo Tsuruta, who would generally be considered one of the 5 or 6 biggest stars in the history of Japanese wrestling. Tsuruta passed away on May 13 from internal bleeding after kidney transplant surgery in the Philippines at the age of 49. A private ceremony was held a few days later which was kept a secret from the public ahead of time. As is tradition with Japanese celebrities, a more public ceremony was held later at the Aoyama Funeral Center in Tokyo. It is believed that with the exception of Shohei Baba, 1999, and El Santo 1984, this may have been the largest crowd ever to attend the funeral of a pro wrestling star. Baba's funeral on April 17, 1999, which attracted 28,000 fans, is the largest ever for a sports figure in Japan and at the time was believed to be the largest ever for a professional athlete anywhere in the world. Virtually everyone employed with the now split-up All Japan Pro Wrestling Group, just days after the split became public knowledge, attended with the exception of Akira Taue and Jun Akiyama. It was covered as both a major news and sports story in Japan, particularly by NTV, where Tsuruta was a major television star in the 70s and 80s. New Japan officers and Tsuruta contemporaries Seiji Sakaguchi and Tatsumi Fujinami, both of whom had similar careers to Tsuruta as being somewhat in the shadow of a larger-than-life figure, attended the funeral along with Shinya Hashimoto, Atsushi Onita and Tarzan Goto, who began their careers with All Japan when Tsuruta was the big star with Baba, before achieving greater fame after leaving, also attended. As would be expected from such a joint show, most of the news regarding the first ever combination AAA EMLL show took place behind the scenes and only showed the promotional war to have much greater emotions than similar ones in the United States and Japan. The show on June 17 at the Plaza de Toros in Mexico City, put together basically at the insistence of network executives at Televisa, which has aired both promotions during most of the lengthy war between the sides which started in 1992 when EMLL booker Antonio Pena, with the backing of the network, recruited most of the good young talent and formed AAA, starting a bitter war with war stories over the years that far exceed any similar stories in other cultures. The show didn't have a spectacular lineup on paper, so the draw was the lure of the two companies in the same matches and on the same stage, which resulted in about 40,000 fans attending at the 58,000-seat bullfighting arena in Mexico City. It was a healthy crowd, with some paper but not a great deal, but didn't come close to the turn-away crowd in the building from 1993 for the Conan vs. Cien Caras and Pero Aguayo vs. Mascara Ano 2000 double headliner. Most of the stories were behind the scenes with the company's inability to get along. Both Pena and Paco Alonso were at the show, but Alonso refused to come to the ring with Pena. The wrestlers were kept in separate dressing rooms with messengers going in between to carry finishes. The crowd was said to be 85% pro-EMLL, as even the AAA babyfaces, including Octagon, which shocked everyone, were heavily booed. The crowd was also male-oriented, as heels Rey Bucanero and El Satanico and Ultimo Guerrero of EMLL were cheered hugely against the pretty boy faces Tarzan Boy, EMLL, and Hector Garza and Latin Lover. By the end of the show, there was an in-ring brawl, partially perhaps to set up another show with more of a promotion versus promotion angle, but we're told far more of the fighting had legit overtones. The show aired the next morning on Televisa and will air on June 27th in the United States on Galavision, but was said to be very disappointing in front of the camera, although it was praised in the local media. We'll try and get a better report in next week's issue. There was major heat among the wrestlers, with the feeling of the EMLL crew that the wrestlers now in AAA, who do what would be closer to a hardcore style, are making a joke out of wrestling by using non-wrestling celebrities, lame angles, although EMLL in recent years has coped that. Heel referees who carry more heat than the actual heels and destroying wrestling's credibility. The AAA wrestlers consider the EMLL mat technicians as old fogies doing a style that is dated. The arguments are no different from other cultures, but the passion among the wrestlers is a lot stronger. Both groups are relatively successful but appeal to a different fan base. The EMLL wrestlers sold little and in many cases, embarrassed the AAA wrestlers in the ring with their inability to keep up in straight matches. It was said among the AAA talent that only Abismo Negro was able to rise to the occasion. When it was over, after a legit fight broke out with former partners in AAA Cibernetico and Pierroth Jr., which apparently started out as a partners breakup angle, the EMLL security force which was at the show attacked Cibernetico too enthusiastically. The wrestlers from both groups ran out at this point, which to the crowd looked like run-ins, but a lot was unscheduled. At first the respected veterans of each crew, Octagon of AAA and Negro Casas in EMLL, attempted to play peacemakers, but it didn't work, and the AAA guys reportedly didn't come out looking very good. There were musical acts between matches and very limited good in-ring action. All the matches were kept to one fall and the faces were put over in every match. 1. In the only promotion versus promotion match, Mr. Niebla and Olympico and Emilio Charles Jr., all EMLL babyfaces, beat El Texano and Cobarde and Sangre Chicana, all AAA heels, when Olympico pinned Cobarde in 10:07. 2. Tarzan Boy EMLL, teamed with AAA babyfaces Hector Garza and Latin Lover to beat the EMLL heel trio of Los Infernales, El Satanico and Rey Bucanero and Ultimo Guerrero in 11:31 when Lover pinned Bucanero after a power bomb. Satanico made Lover submit and Garza, after doing his corkscrew plancha on Satanico outside the ring, pinned him clean inside the ring. Lover, just coming back from knee surgery, was said to have been injured again and the Infernales gave him little respect in the ring. 3. The team of brothers that haven't teamed together in more than 8 years, Heavy Metal AAA Negro Casas and Felino EMLL, defeated Bestia Salvaje EMLL, Electroshock AAA, and Rata Morgan in 15:06. The finish saw the Casas brothers perform simultaneous La Magistral cradles, the move Negro Casas popularized in the 80s before Dandy made it famous in Mexico as the Dandana, on the Rudos for the win. 4. Octagon AAA, Brazo de Plata Amel, Rayo de Jalisco Jr. Amel, and La Parca Jr. AAA defeated Cibernetico AAA, Abismo Negro AAA, Shocker Amel and Pierroth Jr. Amel in 13:05. Super Porky pinned both Cibernetico and Shocker simultaneously with his splash off the top rope. After the match was over, they had the promotion versus promotion brawl. Both WWF and WCW faced a loss of major sponsorship over the past week, in part due to the nature of the programming and in part due to playing the political game wrong. MCI WorldCom announced on June 15 that it was pulling all advertising off SmackDown, 2 weeks after a presentation by the parent's television council to the company's board of directors and stockholders. Bernard Ebbers, the president and CEO of MCI WorldCom, wrote in a letter to the PTC, "Thank you for bringing to our attention your concerns regarding MCI WorldCom's advertising on the television program WWF SmackDown. We appreciate the information you have provided regarding this matter, and we want you to know that we share your concerns and agree wholeheartedly that advertising on WWF SmackDown is not appropriate. This is not the kind of programming MCI WorldCom wants to be associated with, and MCI WorldCom has suspended all advertising on this program. We apologize that we did not take responsibility in this matter sooner and address it." Legendary television personality Steve Allen, who is little known nowadays, was a television wrestling announcer during its 50s network heyday and later appeared at a WrestleMania in an ill-fated skit with Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov. Allen is now honorary chairman of the PTC, addressed the board and stockholders along with civil rights activist and PTC advisory board member C. Dolores Tucker, no relation to the former sports entertainment star of the early 70s of the same name, imploring the company to pull out. Tucker, after the pullout, praised WorldCom for joining other corporate giants who refuse to sponsor programming that not only glamorizes violence to small children, but also treats them to heavy doses of violence, racial stereotyping, foul language, graphic sexual innuendo, and sexist comments. Gary Davis, Vice President of Public Relations of the WWF, told the Clarion Ledger in response that the PTC is entitled to continue its campaign as the self-appointed television censor, but we believe the world is big enough to have family-oriented programming and other forms of entertainment as well. The June 8th SmackDown, the week after some national publicity developed stemming from Allen and Tucker's speech, was toned down to the point the PTC in its own newsletter described the show as the least offensive episode in months, and perhaps of the entire season. Sexual innuendo was at a minimum. Foul language previously used with pride was often bleeped out or kept off the script, and the report stated the banter back and forth between Jerry Lawler and Michael Cole was the tamest of the season, and also noted the WWF inserting the PSA from several months ago with the top wrestlers telling kids to not try to emulate the wrestling moves of the pros. It was critical of some of the close-ups of some of the mildly raunchy signs. On the June 15th show, things were so tame that when Christian used the terms blows as a slang reference and also to the city of Chicago, the word was edited out, as well as Rock's phrase becoming straight up your candy bleep in his interview. PTC claims 32 major advertisers have pulled off SmackDown thus far. The number is somewhat misleading as some of the advertisers, such as Wrigley's, pulled out of advertising on all wrestling shows long before the PTC got involved. The PTC is only concerned with SmackDown because of the antiquated notion that there is somehow something different about over-the-air broadcast television and cable television, despite the fact the number of homes that actually can get USA Network, TNT, TBS and UPN are all relatively close. At the same time, a major sponsor of WCW programming has also pulled out. We've got conflicting reports on who the sponsor was. A Gene Okerlund hotline report claimed it was Burger King, but others say it actually was Toy Biz, but the figure was confirmed as being a $500,000 loss of revenue to a company that is already hemorrhaging money at a record pace, and the specific reason for the pullout cited was the language on the show. The WWF PTC issue continues, despite SmackDown being toned down, because of how the WWF publicly handled the situation. Months back, when this became a major media story, the WWF attempted to turn it into a personal attack on L. Brent Bozell, the head of the PTC. This backfired on the WWF because while some of what Bozell wrote about WWF programming was reactionary, if one legitimately looked at the arguments from both sides during that time frame instead of reacted in the fashion of many fans who feel the need to defend wrestling at all costs regardless of whether the points their critics have are valid, Bozell's points were far stronger than the WWF's responses. However, when WWF toned down SmackDown, the results were that the ratings showed a strong improvement, so realistically everybody won out. The PTC got a tamer show with a high percentage of viewers under 11, which is the main Achilles heel of the WWF when it tries to defend its programming vis-a-vis other shows on television that simply don't draw that audience. Wrestling fans got better shows, as it turned out, and the WWF got stronger ratings. But making the attack personal, as we stated last year when this all went down, guaranteed that toning down the show wouldn't be enough and the PTC would continue to monitor the show. The WWF, while far less raunchier across the board than 1 year ago, did slowly make changes that didn't matter to anyone except to those monitoring the show and could do them damage. For example, Godfather and Val Venus, in the period after toning down the show, were kept off SmackDown because of them playing the pimp and porn star characters. Godfather was then brought back, but the announcers never referred to him as a pimp, and he toned down his catchphrase to include no references to being a pimp or smoking weed. In recent months, the Godfather presentation went back to its former presentation. Whether this is a silly point or not, it was a point that was going to be a lightning rod to advertisers that had been assured the show was toning down and seen, whether valid or not, as a step back into the controversial direction. While SmackDown has gotten tame since last year when this was a controversy, when it turned into a fight, people started choosing sides, and it was a fight that may not have hurt the WWF if the advertisers didn't listen to the PTC anymore, but even at best, it was a fight the WWF didn't need to be anything but conciliatory, and once the big advertiser pullout story rocked the stock prices and made major press. By toning down, but making the fight more personal than it needed to be, it guaranteed it would come back. It's resulted in another major casualty because of it. If this is an isolated corporation, the WWF's advertising is strong enough to not be hurt by it, as we've seen. This can easily become a domino effect, which will hurt stock prices that only recently have started to rebound to a level only slightly below what they were when this controversy broke out last year. There is a funny part of this controversy. The PTC on its website has a marketplace where they get a percentage of sales revenue. One of the companies in the PTC marketplace is Toys R Us, which means that through the PTC, which gets a cut of the sales, you can purchase pro wrestling merchandise. Going against the monstrous rating for the deciding game of the NBA playoffs, both Raw and Nitro took a slight hit. Raw finished with a 5.79 rating, 5.23 first hour, 6.36 second hour, and a 9.0 share. Nitro finished with a 2.75 rating, 2.96 first hour, 2.53 second hour, and a 4.5 share. The total wrestling viewing audience of 9 million was 15% down from the previous week, which largely can be attributed to the Pacers-Lakers game, which drew a 17.3 rating on the overnights. As it pertained by Nitro, what was strange is that the first hour of Nitro was below the usual level, despite the NBA game not having started, while the second hour, while down slightly from usual levels of the past few weeks, actually held up better in comparison with the first hour than usual, which may be a sign it was considered by viewers as a better show. The first quarter of Raw did the lowest quarter hour in its regular time slot months going back to 1998, and during that period Raw has had a season of football and plenty of NBA playoff games to contend with. Raw picked up greatly, picking up 31% of the Nitro audience when Nitro went off the air, which is a higher figure than usual despite the strong competition from a close game. Raw's main event of Rock vs. Test and Albert did a 6.45 final quarter and a 6.99 overrun. Nitro's Jarrett vs. Scott Steiner title match drew a 2.38 final quarter and a 3.20 overrun. Head-to-head comparisons saw Raw at 4.37, Angle vs. Bubba Ray Dudley, to 2.86, Nash vs. Cat, Raw at 5.34, Faction Interview, beginning of X-Pac vs. Benoit, to 2.39, Artist vs. Mysterio Jr. vs. Loco, Stasiak and Palumbo vs. Rick Steiner and Abbott, Raw at 5.52, Benoit vs. X-Pac finish, China vs. Guerrero, to 2.19, Vampiro Torborg Angle, beginning of Triple Threat vs. Chronic and Bagwell, Raw at 5.68, Edge vs. Jericho, to 2.38, ending of Triple Threat match, beginning of Jarrett vs. Scott Steiner, and Raw at 5.58, Undertaker vs. Bossman and Buchanan, to Nitro's 3.19, Jarrett vs. Scott Steiner. SmackDown on June 15 drew a 4.55 rating and 8.2. Thunder on June 14 drew a 2.54 rating and 4.2 share, which is okay going up against the NBA playoffs. Weekend rating saw Livewire at 1.0, its lowest rating in many years, Superstars at 1.3, also a low figure, and Heat at 2.66. WCW Saturday Night did a 1.4. ECW on TNN on June 16 drew a 0.81 rating and 1.6 share. With Roller Jam and Motor Madness being preempted for arena football, the ECW show drew more than triple the audience of any other show on the station the entire day. The show's open drew in 0.61, and grew throughout, ending with Credible vs. Lynn at 0.96. The arena football game that TNN pushed throughout wrestling drew about one-third of the typical Roller Jam audience with an 0.19 rating. The Hulk Hogan biography on June 13 on A&E drew a 1.4 rating, which is roughly average for A&E biographies. The Galavision show on June 13 was cut down to 1 hour, which was all AAA, drew a 2.1 Hispanic rating. Japanese television rundown. June 4 Dream Stage Entertainment. This was the Pride pay-per-view show, which airs in the US on DirecTV on July 1. Unless you're someone who needs to watch every MMA pay-per-view show, this isn't one worth going out of the way to see. It was definitely a thumbs-down show. It was better than the last UFC, but there really weren't any good matches. The best in my book was Carlos Barreto vs. Trey Teligman, but that wasn't a good spectator match, but you could see it was a hard struggle. The main event looked great on paper, but when you have a match with two great stand-up fighters and virtually the entire match takes place on the ground, it shows there are no guarantees in this sport. After the music played for the first match, which never took place because João de Oliveira was burned by the pyro, they had a delay and went to the planned second match. 1. Keith Haring, 245.7, United States, beat Willie Peters, 214.9, Holland in 48 seconds when Haring took him down and choked him out. Peters was a late replacement, who didn't get the word he was fighting until 3 days beforehand, so he was basically in a jobber role. Not much to this one. 2. Carlos Barreto, 237.4, Brazil, won a decision in 20 minutes over Trey Teligman, 225.9, United States. This wasn't a great spectator match, but it was interesting to watch. Barreto kept going for takedowns and Teligman kept sprawling and avoiding them. Teligman still couldn't do any damage standing. Barreto finally got him down in the guard about 7 minutes in and threw some short punches, but Teligman probably threw just as much from the bottom. Barreto probably won the round barely just because he was more aggressive, but it was very even. In the second round, Barreto rushed at Teligman and took him down. Barreto got some punches in before Teligman got away. Both guys were tired standing and Teligman still did no damage before Barreto took him down one more time and scored a little at the end. Barreto had to win, but it was very close and one flurry at any time by Teligman would have made it a hard decision. 3. Alan Goes, 207.5, Brazil, beat Vernon White 197.3 United States, via decision in 20 minutes. Goes won this with superior grappling. He took White down quickly and kept his position. He got a full mount and mainly worked the ribs. White escaped at 8:30 but Goes quickly took him down again. In the second round, Goes took him down and got him out. Goes used a unique tactic and thrusting his shoulder into White's face, almost like a punch, but in doing so kept both hands to keep White in position. White escaped but was quickly taken down again and Goes threw more shoulders. Goes hit White with a flurry in the last 15 seconds to clinch the decision in a dull match. 4. Carlos Newton, 179.5, Canada, beat Naoki Sano, 206.6, Japan, in 40 seconds when the smaller Newton took Sano down, quickly got a mount and rolled into an armbar. Before the match, Minoru Toyonaga, Newton's original opponent, made his speech about having to retire due to a brain tumor. Sano has never looked good in a shoe with adequate training time, so even though he had the big size edge, taking the fight with only a few days' notice he realistically had no chance. 5. Akira Shoji, 209.9, Japan, defeated John Renkin, 179.5, United States, in 6:44. Realistically, this was only a battle to see if Shoji could beat Renkin, whose only credential in Japan is that he was the loser in Masakatsu Funaki's first Vale Tudo rules match quicker than Funaki did. He didn't. Shoji took him down, got a side mount, then a full mount and missed with the armbar. Shoji took him down again, went through the same steps and this time got the armbar. It was a mismatch and not very exciting. The most exciting thing about it was Shoji doing a backflip after running. 6. Rico Rodriguez, 239.8, United States, beat Gary Goodridge, 232.5, Canada, by decision in 20 minutes. This was similar to the Barreto-Teligman match. In the first round, Goodridge was able to block Rodriguez's shot, but never could get a good punch off. Rodriguez finally took him down at 3:50. Goodridge got out and was able to stave off Rodriguez's attempts to take him down. On another attempt, Goodridge nearly got a guillotine but Rodriguez powered out and took him down and got the mount to end the round, but did no real damage. In the second round, Rodriguez went for a takedown. Goodridge at first blocked it with a guillotine but Rodriguez powered him down in 50 seconds. Rodriguez was more aggressive on top, slapping his ears and getting a lot of punches to the body and he kept the top position and kept scoring with body punches till the end. Kind of boring. 7. Igor Vachenchin, 234.5, Ukraine, beat Daijiro Matsui 196.2, Japan. This was an on-paper mismatch both in terms of ability and size. Matsui went for a takedown, but Vachenchin blocked it and got behind Matsui in an amateur wrestling down position. Vachenchin threw his hard punches to the ear and eye, and kept pounding on him. Matsui was soon bleeding from above the right eye, and when it got bad enough and the cut was deep and Matsui's face was the proverbial crimson mask, the match was stopped. 8. Vitor Belfort, 198.4, Brazil, defeated Gilbert Yvel, 227.7, Holland, via decision in 20 minutes. It was a great open with Belfort decking Yvel with a left. Belfort was on top in the guard the rest of the round, doing the ground and pound. He got some distance and fired in a punch that split Yvel's right eye open at 2:40 and worked the body and head in combinations from the top until the end of the round. He got a good flurry in late where he got distance. Belfort's punches have more zing than virtually any MMA fighter because of his boxing background. Second round saw Belfort take no chances and take him down. He worked the ribs. The ref ordered a stand-up in a desperate attempt to save the show with a good main event. Belfort took Yvel right down again and worked the ribs. Quickly, the ref ordered another stand-up, which was absurd since Belfort was hardly stalling and continually working from the top. He was mad. It was a bad call from a fairness standpoint, but I can understand the bad call as the ref felt he needed to save the show. Belfort took Yvel down immediately and kept busy until the end of the fight. A big disappointment considering what was figured to come out of this fight. Belfort, if he can get his head together, is going to be very tough to beat because his boxing skill is better than almost everyone, and he's good at takedowns and blocking takedowns. His strategy here was to avoid Yvel's strength, so he didn't play his own strength because he knew Yvel had nothing on the ground. It really exposed Yvel in that he had a 30-pound weight edge and could do nothing on offense and probably puts Belfort back in contention in the under 200 division. However, in his biggest wins in rings over Kosaka and Tamura under these rules, the same thing would have happened as they were able to take him down at will, but after enough stand-ups, he was able to rock their world and eventually hammer both of them. Mexico. There is a pay-per-view scheduled for July 14th. There is some speculation that the long-talked-about Blue Panther vs. El Hijo del Santo vs. El Hijo del Diablo triangular mask vs. title bout could take place on that show. Jushin Liger will be working the Triple Mania show on July 5th at Tokyo Korakuen Hall as part of Triple A's 5-day tour with shows on July 6th in Yokohama, July 7th in Nagoya, July 8th in Kobe and July 9th in Osaka. Nicho El Millonario turned back Rudo on June 9th in Tijuana in the match where he teamed with Pero Aguayo and La Parca against Rey Mysterio Sr. and Halloween and Damien. The finish saw Nicho give Parca a low blow, and then reunited with Rey Sr., Halloween and Damien and will work as a team called La Familia. On June 11th in the same city, El Salsero regained the AWA welterweight title from Mosco de la Merced. The June 23rd Tijuana show was scheduled for Felino and Brazo de Plata vs. El Hijo del Santo and Pierroth Jr. in a match where the members of the losing team would have to wrestle each other in mask vs. hair match. Best guess is Super Porky getting shaved. The June 18th Tijuana main event saw Tarzan Boy and Salsero and Suicida over Halloween and Damien and Rey Mysterio Sr. via DQ. The June 16th Arena Mexico show headliner saw Los Hermanos Dinamita over Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Tarzan Boy and Atlantis. Tinieblas Sr. rescued a Lush on the undercard after a match. On the June 15th IWRG TV taping in the three-way, it was Bombero Infernal losing his hair in a match against the mask of Dr. Cerebro and the hair of Ciclone Ramirez. All Japan. At this point after the July tour, All Japan only has confirmed dates booked for August 20th and August 26th at Korakuen Hall. June 7th TV rating was a 1.0. New Japan. Sky Perfect announced it would be broadcasting the July 30th Yokohama Arena show headlined by Riki Choshu vs. Atsushi Onita, which would be the first live New Japan pay-per-view show in history. The show will have 7 matches and last 4 hours and the cost will be $19. Because New Japan in the past had used all its major matches as tape-delayed television product and much of the company's stock was owned by its network, TV Asahi, which one of the first run of the programming, it hadn't experimented in pay-per-view, which in Japan, as compared to the US, is in its infancy and is not a major revenue generator yet. New Japan's plans for the future include doing regular pay-per-view shows and having internet pay-per-view broadcasts of every house show. Tokumitsu Ishizawa, Kendo Kashin, will be doing a training camp with Kazuyuki Fujita under Antonio Inoki for the August 27th Pride show. To continue with the angle, Fujinami is saying that Kashin has a New Japan contract and will not be allowed to go to Pride. This is basically an Inoki vs. Fujinami storyline angle to keep the New Japan vs. UFO thing alive. Pay-per-view is in its infancy in Japan as there are only about 1 million homes with pay-per-view capability as opposed to about 38 million in the United States and Canada. Most of the minor pay-per-view events, such as the smaller companies like Pancrase or FMW, or WCW, which is the only American company whose pay-per-view shows air in Japan, as WWF has never had a deal and ECW had a deal but lost it relatively quickly, to less than 5,000 buys. Supposedly the record was one of the Pride shows, I'd presume either January or May, at 50,000 buys, which is actually a 5.0 buy rate. In the infancy of pay-per-view, the first Hickson Gracie vs. Nobuhiko Takada did an 8.0 buy rate, but like in the US, the buy rates are much higher when pay-per-view is a novelty than when it becomes a mature business. The negative on Choshu vs. Onita as a first pay-per-view is that even though it's a dream matchup of celebrities and will draw mainstream curiosity buys with Choshu coming out of retirement after 2.5 years, the match is almost guaranteed to be a huge disappointment and that may not be the taste you'd want to leave on the first pay-per-view show. Inoki is doing an angle where he's asked Naoya Ogawa to vacate the NWA title. Ogawa on June 19 announced that he would vacate the title to train for a match with Rickson Gracie, which has yet to be officially announced, but it is probably going to be looked at for next spring. There are many people, including those who have fought Masakatsu Funaki in the past, who watching the match feel he did the job at the end because of how little resistance he gave once they went to the ground. There was no logical reason at the time why Funaki would do the job, since why retire in that manner, because that match really erased a lot of what he legitimately had accomplished in his career. If it was to build as a stepping stone to heat up a bigger match, and there is the pro wrestling tradition as witnessed by Mick Foley and Terry Funk, the noble thing to do is do a job in your last match to build up the people who have to carry on in the business. Ogawa has been promoted as Japan's national symbol tough guy pro wrestler. Since Ogawa has no legitimate losses on his record, and how could he when he's never been put in a position for it to happen, and he's got heavyweight size, he and Rickson could be a huge stadium match for Japanese national pride if and when it can be arranged. At least this would give some sort of an explanation for what isn't easily explainable. Another explanation could simply be that Funaki physically had nothing left, since Funaki the fighter after 1998 was a totally different fighter for the most part anyway. Inoki has also talked about wanting to train Tadao Yasuda, who is New Japan's biggest wrestler, about 6'5" and 330 pounds, for pride. Yasuda, a former sumo star, but long since retired from competitive sports, is 36. A funny thing in the latest magazines is they had photos when Inoki went to Minneapolis to meet with Jesse Ventura. He also went to Brad Reingen's training camp where both Don Frye and Brock Lesnar were training, and in photos showed Inoki on top in a dominant position pinning Lesnar. Knowing Inoki, I thought that was hilarious. Other Japan notes. At the June 15 Rings show, Akira Maeda claimed that he never attacked Pancrase president Masami Ozaki in a speech to the fans. It is expected that Ozaki will formally file charges against Maeda this week. Maeda started screaming about Ozaki being cheap in paying fighters, but he seems to have plenty of money for his personal affairs. In what was actually the biggest news in the ring on the card at Tokyo Yoyogi Gym 2, Folk Han, the master of submission illusion in pro wrestling, did what is believed to be his first real shoot in Japan for Rings and beat veteran MMA competitor Brandon Lee Hinkle in 8-11 with an armbar submission. Han was a legit submission master before and during his early Rings career, as he competed in the World Samba Championships 1 year in Japan and was tapping everyone out in seconds. Now, with a listed age of 39, and he may be older, he had cancelled out of a few previous Rings matches that would have been shoots in recent months, since Rings went to what appears to be a total shoot format. In the main event on the show, Henato Babalu won via decision over Hiromitsu Kaniara. American indie pro wrestler Brad Kohler did the show and lost in 31 seconds to a knee-bar from Valentin Overeem. FMW ran an angle on June 16 at Korakuen Hall with Genichiro Tenryu debuting as Hayabusa. The main event was billed as H and Hayabusa against Koto Fuyuki and Goemon Koji Nakagawa. There had already been a push in the media of Tenryu showing up at the show, so it was basically expected Tenryu would be under the mask. Anyway, the bout started with H against both, with no partner, and they beat him and bloodied him when Tenryu did the run-in wearing the mask. Fans went crazy chanting Tenryu, and he ended up giving Fuyuki a power bomb, leading to H using the Firebird 450 splash on him for the pin. Fuyuki vowed to unmask Hayabusa on June 21. Speaking of Tenryu, LLPW announced a match for July 2 at the new Diva Ariake Arena, headlined by Tenryu vs Shinobu Kandori in a man vs woman singles match. The match will be done with 3-minute rounds but no time limit of rounds. Tenryu and Kandori have worked together twice in tag team matches in 1995 and 1998. The 1995 was, I believe, the first man versus woman match in Japan, and was a big deal at the time. Like in the US, it's been done so often, in particular in FMW, where Kyoko Inoue is booked like China in WWF, basically a woman booked as a male wrestler, to where it's not even that much of a novelty. Still, for a major star the level of Tenryu in a singles match, it's never been done at this level. All Japan Women announced a tournament for its vacant tag team titles, which would take place from July 14 through July 16 when they run 3 straight TV tapings at the Fuji Network studios. The teams involved are Miho Wakizawa and Keo Nomi, Nani Takahashi, and Momoe Nakanishi, Tsuko Mita, and Mima Shimoda. A JD team not yet announced, Tomoko Watanabe and Kumiko Makawa, and a JWP team. Also on the 3 nights, Manami Toyota defends the WWWA title against LLPW's Eagle Sawai on July 14, and Azumi Hyuga of JWP defends the All-Pacific title against Watanabe on July 15. On JD's June 13 Korakuen Hall show, They had a Vale Tudo Rules shoot match as the main event with JD's Megumi Yabushita winning a decision after going 30 minutes with AJW's Momoe Nakanishi. June 15, Toriuman returns to Kobe on June 26 with Jinsei Shinzaki teaming for the first time with Dragon Kid. The two are actually related in real life, against Yoshikazu Taro and Suwa in the main event. LLPW has booked a big show for September 2nd at Yokohama Bunka Gym. Neo Ladies ran June 16 in Tokyo with Kyoko and Takako Inoue over Yuka Nakamura and Misai Genki in the main event. The angle at the end saw Kyoko run down Genki, saying she never improved to the level they expected. Genki is one of the few of the new generation women with good size to set up a mixed tag. Genki is bringing Koichiro Kimura, who fought in some of the early shoot tournaments as well as did some pro wrestling, as her partner, while Inoue will team with Chocoball Mukai. New Japan's Tatsuhito Takaiwa was in the studio watching a tag match from Osaka Pro Wrestling with Kishinbo Kamen and Ebison, who wear clown outfits, against Mandora and policemen, and remarked that he didn't consider what they do as pro wrestling. In minor title switches, on June 18 in Tokyo, Battlerts changed its independent junior title, bringing in jiu-jitsu fighter Naohiko Taira, who had only had 3 pro wrestling matches, and put him over strong, beating Katsumi Yujuda, and then he challenged all the junior heavyweights in every promotion for their belts. Azumi Hyuga and Commando Boyoshoi beat AJW Saps on June 18 at Korakuen Hall to win the JWP tag titles. The main event on that show, which drew virtually no fans, saw Dynamite Kansai have her final match with JWP before leaving for GIA, which right now is by far the most popular of the women promotions in Japan through using the 80s and early 90s superstars like the Crush Gals, Akira Hokuto, Devil Masami, Kansai and Mayumi Ozaki, and she shook hands with all the wrestlers in the ring in a leaving celebration. On June 18 in Osaka, Super Delphin regained the Osaka Pro Wrestling title, beating former K1 fighter Takahiro Murahama. Here and there. Mike Mooneyham of the Charleston Post and Courier and Wrestling Observer Hotline ran a lengthy interview with Bruno Sammartino regarding no longer making any appearances at pro wrestling events after the show that took place this past weekend. Sammartino said the last straw was Mark Madden's comments on Nitro about David Arquette's title win, making Sammartino, Buddy Rogers and Pat O'Connor turn over in their graves. That really ticked me off, said Sammartino. I contacted an attorney. It's their business if they want to hire garbage, but when that garbage makes remarks like that because we don't particularly care for each other, that's something I felt I needed to do something about. I gave them a very simple choice. Either he apologize or I take him and WCW to court, and let the chips fall where they may. They made him apologize, and I washed my hands of professional wrestling. Sammartino said he didn't watch the show where Madden apologized and said an apology, even though Madden's tone was clearly not apologetic, was enough for him. He said he wouldn't have even done the appearance in Hamburg, Pennsylvania this past weekend had he not previously committed to it. I have nothing to do with wrestling, and I want nothing to do with it in the future. After this, I will not do anything at all, but I have made this commitment. Sammartino's explanation of his problems with Madden date from a 1991 interview. It should be noted that Sammartino was adamantly publicly against steroid use and spoke about top wrestlers, Hulk Hogan in particular, that were using them, particularly after Hogan lied on Arsenio Hall and claimed he had only done steroids 3 times in his entire life, all to rehabilitate a bicep injury. In his autobiography, Sammartino talked about that none of his sons had ever taken steroids, which he later admitted he wished he hadn't written because David had. Sammartino said he didn't know for sure that David had used steroids until a 1989 serious health scare where David nearly died while on a wrestling tour of All Japan. David claimed Bruno knew about his steroid use, which started in 1981 and was heavy from 1987 to 1989, and said his father did everything to discourage him from using them. It was in that same interview that David claimed brother Daryl, a one-time college javelin thrower who is now a police officer, had used them, which Bruno denies to this day. Bruno hasn't spoken with David since the interview. IWA ran its Hot Summer Night show on June 16 in Aguas Buenas, Puerto Rico with help from the WWF, drawing 4,000 fans. The top matches saw Too Cool keep the WWF tag titles over Edge and Christian in the main event. Miguel Perez went to a no contest with Bob Holly in a hardcore match. Kurt Angle pinned Perry Saturn and Shane beat Fidel Sierra in a tables match. The only title change saw the IWA tag belts go to Nueva Generacion, Nuevo Gran Apollo and Ricky Banderas, over Champs Club WWF, Steve Bradley and Andy Anderson, Star Corporation, Chicky Star and Victor the Bodyguard, and Sexy and Sensual, Sean Hill and Andres Borges, although it was a short-lived title switch. They changed 2 titles on June 17 in Humacao, Puerto Rico. Jesus Cristobal, who was better known in Mexico as Zorro, won the junior title from Ismael Feliciano. Club WWF regained the tag team titles they had lost the previous night. Ron Fuller's K-Town Showdown promotion drew 800 fans on June 16 for a show headlined by Rock and Roll Express over Damien and the Damaja. It was a combination of former Smoky Mountain guys, Tim Horner, Dirty White Boy, Killer Kyle as Big Money Marcus, Rock and Rolls, Jimmy Golden, and current OVW guys, Rico Constantino, Robbie D, Jason Lee, Derek King, BJ Payne, Scotty Saber, etc. They continued the shoot angle with rival promoter Terry Landell and Fuller. Landell was in the crowd yelling at Fuller, who laid on his back and dared him to come into the ring. With Jim Cornette having his big show in Louisville on June 23, they suspended him for 2 weeks because of his June 9 attack on Bob Armstrong, and he'll be back on June 30 with Rico Constantino and Steve Armstrong versus Russ McCulloch and Nick Dinsmore, with Bob Armstrong handcuffed to Jim Cornette at ringside. June 23 will have a Battle Royal plus Steve Armstrong and Tracy Smothers reuniting as the Southern Boys. The Terry Landell-Fuller angle continued the next night in Knoxville on Landell's show, where Landell claimed to have run Cornette out of Knoxville, that Fuller would be out of business, and that on his July show both Jimmy Golden and Robert Fuller would appear. The Pro Football vs. Pro Wrestler heavily advertised Tough Man Contest premiere, which airs on June 23 on FX Cable, was taped on June 4 in Detroit. The idea the producers had figured on was for the wrestlers, since they are fake actors, to get pounded on by the fringe football players, a collection of guys who at one point or another played on an NFL team, since they are real athletes, not realizing that wrestlers, because of the nature of their training, should probably be favored in this type of competition. The idea was the footballers would pound them, and the producers brought in Harrison Norris, Hard Body Harrison, one of the African-American guys who is suing WCW, who has won some Tough Man competition and happens to be managed by the same people who promoted the show, as the ringer to save the wrestlers. There was more fighting behind the scenes than in the ring because the wrestling team didn't want Norris. The wrestlers won most of the matches, although we didn't get all of the results. Ken Shamrock, as it turned out due to a scheduling conflict, couldn't do the show, so they used Honky Tonk Man, in character, as coach, which, with the producers wanting the promos and the nature to have credibility, that change was hardly conducive to what they were trying, but they're the ones who picked him. The wrestlers had a ringer of sorts in Mark Bell, who at one time trained under Kevin Rooney, a famous boxing trainer affiliated with Mike Tyson, who along with Stephen Gamlin, a huge former football player who failed as a WWF trainee, were said to be the most impressive. The June 25th show in Philadelphia at the Electric Factory will feature virtually all of the wrestlers for both Atsushi Onita's promotion as well as Combat Zone Wrestling. The main event is Onita and Ichiro Yaguchi and Nobutaka Araya versus Terry Funk and John Zandig and a mystery partner in an explosive barbed wire match. For fans of 80s wrestling and the old Mid-South wrestling, the Bill Watts shoot interview just released through RF Video is both an entertaining and informative look at Watts' promotional theories. Watts, for his good and bad points, and you'll recognize both, is a great communicator and someone who isn't afraid to speak his mind. The interview covers his entire career in wrestling, from his days at the University of Oklahoma, to his 1995 stint at the WWF as Vince McMahon's second-in-command. In between are stories from Watts' career around the country working for most of the major promoters in the 60s and 70s, the Atlanta promotional war of the 70s, his booking in Atlanta and Florida during the heydays of both territories, the start and success of Mid-South wrestling and its collapse, and a lot more. This was the most interesting of any interviews of its type, and I'd highly recommend it to anyone interested in that period of wrestling, or even people who aren't but are interested in promotional and booking theories by someone who had a lot of success, albeit in another era. The cost is $24.95 and it's available at P.O. Box 797, Langhorne, Pennsylvania 19047. Superstar Billy Graham's website will be launched officially at superstarbillygraham.com on June 23 with an interview with myself. Among those that will be interviewed in the future on the site are current and past wrestlers. The Discovery Channel is doing a 1-hour documentary on July 11 about breaking into pro wrestling. It is built around 6 potential wrestlers, following them for 1 year, 3 men and 3 women. Sort of based on the MTV Real Life series but with a wrestling overtone. We should have a review of the show for next week's issue. The June 19th People magazine ran a 1-page short on the Christian Wrestling Federation out of Dallas. Former business partners Dennis Corraluzzo and Gino Moore, who had a nasty split-up with Moore, Joe Panzarino and Fred Rubenstein, now running the NWA Jersey shows, have each filed police reports against the other, and both are facing charges, Moore for theft by deception and Corraluzzo for forgery. XPW on June 17 at the Los Angeles Sports Arena was headlined by Sabu DDQ Abdullah the Butcher in a match with tons of outside interference, building to a run-in by Big Dick Dudley cleaning house as a babyface. Most of the show was based around promoter and money man Rob Black doing the thing that all promoters seemingly feel they must do today, the Russo Bischoff McMahon role, playing heel and getting involved in almost every segment on the show. A correction. At one point I mentioned the Dallas Sportatorium no longer exists, but it actually still does since the last deal to tear it down fell through. Sabu worked June 9 TV tapings in Calgary for Stampede Wrestling, drawing 139 paid for a match with Tiger Khan. They did an angle setting up what appears to be the final TV tapings until September, as they are scaling down the operation, for June 23 in Calgary with Sabu, Khan and Johnny Devine in a three-way, but Sabu won't be able to make the date. They are sending all of the out-of-towners back home and running a cut-back schedule. Although the crowd was small, after the Sabu-Khan match, a post-match brawl involving Sabu, Khan, Devine and Greg Pavlik wound up with the crowd chanting Stampede Wrestling after the show, which is the first time the crowd really got into the product to that degree. Sabu is set to return June 30 to July 2 and again in late July. The TV will consist of repeats until the fall most likely. Sabu vs. Khan vs. Pavlik in a three-way on June 12 in Saskatoon drew one of the company's largest crowd in its latest revival, with 600 fans. Phil Lawfon was also on the June 9 show working as a manager for Frankenstein, who is Carl LeDuc doing a combination lunatic and gay gimmick. Fred Durst of Limp Bizkit, and for those of you who don't follow music in the slightest, he's the singer that did the angle on ECW with Steve Corino, managed on the June 16 incredibly strange wrestling show in Mountain View, California. We were when an article in the Physician and Sports Medicine largely on the injury rate in pro wrestling, basically based around an interview with the famed orthopedist, Dr. James Andrews of Birmingham, who has put more wrestlers back together than any physician in the country dating back to the 1970s, where he worked on wrestlers that passed through Columbus, Georgia. Regarding that period, Andrews stated, "I've probably treated all of the old-timers. They didn't have any health care. They were lost medically. Many were ex-athletes who came to professional wrestling already beat up from other sports injuries." He said he's seeing more injuries than ever, both because of the demands of the current wrestling, and because more and more retired wrestlers are suffering from degenerative knees and are becoming functionally disabled. The article stated there are certain patterns of prevalent injuries to pro wrestlers. Herniated discs in their back, shoulder subluxation are frequent, dislocations are rare, and rotator cuff injuries are more common than ever before. Rib fractures were said to be so common that many wrestlers don't even seek treatment for them. Andrews talked about muscle and tendon injuries caused by strength training routines. Actually, correctly performed strength training routines should minimize those injuries. They are common more due to incorrectly put together training routines and more so the widespread use of steroids, which creates muscle to tendon imbalances that lead to tears. ACL injuries are also fairly common, and cervical injuries, such as stingers and burners, occur on occasion, but it was said that wrestlers with increased neck strength seem better equipped to take the punishment. They said monitoring degeneration of the spine in wrestlers, because they are heavily muscled, in easier through MRIs of computed tomography than through the old-fashioned X-ray or physical exam. Andrews said about wrestlers that, once they get hurt, they have to wrestle hurt, and many push too hard during the injury recovery. There was also a quote from Dr. John Brennan, the director of pediatric medicine in Livingston, New Jersey, saying they have noticed a rash of injuries among children, musculoskeletal injuries, laceration and head injuries, among kids mimicking what they see on television. He stated that the younger the kids are, the less they seem to realize that what the pros do is choreographed. The story was very informative, but sadly enlisting pro wrestling injuries, the obvious like Owen Hart, Darren Drozdov and Steve Austin's injuries, also listed as among those suffering serious injuries doing pro wrestling. Actor Jim Carrey suffered a neck injury in September 1998 during a scene with professional wrestler Jerry Lawler, which is so sad it almost kills the entire credibility of the piece. MMA. DirecTV will be broadcasting Pride 9, which is the June 4th show from Nagoya, reviewed in this issue, on pay-per-view in the United States starting on July 1st. Satoru Sayama's promotion, Seikendo, which is also now calling itself Ultimate Boxing, which ran a pay-per-view on June 11th at the Yokohama Arena, is basically a combination of boxing and striking on the ground. The fighters wear 10-ounce gloves, which are lighter than most boxers in the US but heavier than the 5 to 6-ounce gloves worn in MMA competition. You are allowed to throw kicks, so it's similar to the Japanese sport of shootboxing, except in shootboxing, or in sanshu, the Chinese sport similar to shootboxing, once there is a takedown, The guy executes the throw gets points and they stand them back up. In Ultimate Boxing, the match continues like an MMA match on the ground, however you can't do submissions. It has the same rules such as no biting, attacking the eyes or groin and headbutting as MMA, and elbows are also not allowed. In Canada, WEF and the Pride shows did similar numbers. Pride actually did more buys, although WEF grossed more money due to a higher show price. Neither show in Canada did as well as UFC since it's the name brand, and none of the shows in Canada did nearly as well as ECW or WCW. The only figure we got from DirecTV in the United States on Pride is that it did about an 0.26 buy rate, which is good for a taped show. That's a better figure than ECW and WCW do overall, but people with dishes, just by the nature of them having dishes, buy pay-per-view events at far above the average rate than people who own cable do, so a dish-only buy rate will be higher than an overall buy rate. Pancrase announced that Ryushi Yanagisawa, who is ranked number 8 in the company, has left the promotion to join Team Dragon, a Japanese kickboxing promotion. Yanagisawa will be fed as a sacrificial lamb to Musashi on the July 7th K1 show in Sendai. Ken Shamrock was on TSN's Off the Record for a show about escalating violence in sports, dealing more with hockey, on June 16th for an air date of June 22nd. The report we got on the show is that Shamrock was very aggressive defending his viewpoint and was the star guest of the 3 panelists, which included hockey star Mark Bossy and Olympic swimmer Mark Tewksbury. On the show, Shamrock brought up the reality that Akira Maeda, whose name wasn't mentioned but the incident was, became a national hero by doing a sucker kick in Japan, which is noted. Nobody ever figured the Maeda Choshu incident would someday be discussed on Off the Record. Kevin Randleman will be appearing on the show soon. At this point it appears the odds are against the Frank Shamrock vs. Kazushi Sakuraba match taking place on August 27th at the Seibu Dome. They probably have to come to financial terms within about 2 weeks or it'll fall apart just because both wouldn't have adequate time to get ready. The Strike Force promotion, which runs kickboxing events in San Jose and often draws some huge crowds, huge meaning 4,000 at very high ticket prices with local Sanshu star Kungla as the top draw, is also interested in promoting that match on November 4th at the San Jose Arena for ESPN2. On the May 26th Tokyo Dome semifinal with Jeremy Horn vs. Kiyoshi Tamura, apparently the big weight differential was one of the criteria to be considered if a match went the distance, so with Horn having a big edge in a fight that was basically a draw, Tamura won the first round, Horn won the second. That would explain the decision. ECW. Paul Heyman showed up at the June 17th tapings in Danbury, Connecticut for another pep talk. He did his entire speech without talking about money, apparently to see if anyone would speak out about it. Nobody did. He then paid everyone, so checks are caught up. It was basically a rah-rah speech saying that as soon as the trial ends, they can make their move, but nothing can happen until then. The wrestlers seem to understand that. Another factor is with Credible's father-in-law passing away during the week and Kid Cash getting the word just before the show on June 16th that his mother had passed away. He stayed and worked the weekend anyway. It brought the crew together. Matches confirmed for the July 16th pay-per-view from Los Angeles are Credible vs. Dreamer and a ladder barbed wire match for the title, Rhino vs. Sandman for the TV title, and Van Dam vs. Anton. They are hopeful of debuting Psychosis and Bobby Eaton, neither of whom had signed at press time, at or around the pay-per-view. Still no word on a return date for Super Crazy, but is believed to be a few weeks away. ECW has sent TNN a notice of a breach, which is basically a backup plan as an attempt to get out of the 3-year contract at the end of this season even if the judge rules against the WWF and they have to stay on USA. There is talk of reviving the tag titles that were dropped when Credible became heavyweight champ, doing a tournament over 2 days in August at the Hammerstein Ballroom, approximately 3,000 capacity in Manhattan, which isn't a confirmed deal yet. The Dallas debut will be July 28th at the Bronco Bowl, and they are also playing at the Astro Arena in Houston on July 29th for their debut in that market. They'll be doing tapings on June 23rd in Milwaukee and June 24th in Chicago. Milwaukee has Van Dam vs. Rhino, Jazz vs. Francine, Tao vs. Guido with Lynn as ref, and New Jack vs. Angel. Chicago has Credible vs. Sandman, Van Dam vs. Guido, and Lynn vs. Tao. This coming weekend's TV tapings took place on June 17th in Danbury, Connecticut before a crowd of 1,600 paid. Spike Dudley returned. He was also at the house show the previous night, wearing a brace on his leg. Cyrus and Scotty Anton came out to bully him around. Cyrus claimed that ECW paid for Spike's knee surgery, but that TNN needs the money back because they have to pay it to Vince McMahon to come on the station and replace ECW. Dudley attacks Cyrus, but Anton attacks him. This leads to Pitbull Gary Wolf coming out attacking Anton, but Anton got the win with a sharpshooter. Angel and Tony DeVito came out and start bullying ref HC Locke. They insult Locke's wife, so he attacked them. It was 2-on-1 until ref Mike Keener came out. They dumped him. Then ref Nick Bell, former WWF jobber from the early 90s Mike Bell who works Northeast Indies, made the save with a spear and an Enzui Jiri. Baldies got the advantage when refs Jim Molyneux and John Finnegan came out. They were arguing with the Baldies outside the ring when Keener took all of them out with a plancha. Luck ended up pinning DeVito. Styles did the open. Cyrus said they didn't want TV tapings in Danbury, Connecticut and that ECW should tape in real cities like Chicago and Winnipeg, Don Callis' home city. Styles then went babyface saying he lives in Connecticut and that's where the taping is taking place. Cyrus demanded the cameras to be shut down and that they were going to put Roller Jam or Rockin' Bull in its place because the contract with ECW states there have to be 2 announcers and there is only Styles. Gertner, who went out in an ambulance on TV the previous week, showed up for the save. Francine then came out and Cyrus told her to kick Gertner's ass. She dares both announcers to hit her. Gertner said he wouldn't hit a woman, but said Dreamer would, so Dreamer came out. Francine said Credible had a family emergency. His father-in-law, who has been ill for some time, passed away this past week. Jazz attacked Francine and gave her the X Factor and Dreamer and Jazz left together. Chili Willy pinned Tony Mamaluke. After the match, Guido and Sal E attacked Willie. Mahoney made the save but he got doubled on and Graziano laid out Willie with a diving headbutt until Whipwreck came out with a flaming stick for the save. Corino faced Tao. Cyrus told Keener to count fast on Tao but never to count past 2 on Corino. He refused and Cyrus laid him out and appointed Lynn as ref. Match ended with Tao blowing the mist at Lynn when Corino ducked. Tao put the octopus submission on and Victory threw in the towel, but Lynn didn't see it. Lynn started punching blindly and hit Tao, leading to Corino superkicking him for the pin. Diamond pinned during with outside interference and distraction by all of Diamond's crew of clowns. Swinger pinned Roadkill when C.W. Anderson hit Roadkill with a phone. Nova and Chetty then faced the Dangerous Alliance, the Anderson pinning Nova due to distraction from Diamond and Swinger. It's pretty clear they are trying to build the weak tag team division around the Dangerous Alliance, during in Roadkill and Nova and Chetty. Cash pinned Chris Hamrick. Easy Money then attacked Cash until New Jack made the save, doing all the stuff he always does including a balcony dive. Main event saw Van Dam beat Rhino via DQ. Anton and Corino interfered first before Tao got involved. Lynn ended up in the ring squaring off with Van Dam. Rhino went to spear both but they both leapfrogged, so Rhino went through both of them into a table. Van Dam did the same flip dive outside on the network he's done the past few weeks while Lynn and Tao brawled to the back. The match was said to be a disappointment. It was described as being not bad, but it exposes that Van Dam is nowhere near the Shawn Michaels level that some think he is and for that reason it may be better off not airing it. The show was said to be pretty good until the main event flattened it out. Hamrick suffered what appeared to be a jammed shoulder from New Jack's balcony dive on him. Corino was said to have had really good matches over the weekend with Tao and Lynn. Sandman will return this coming week. He missed the shows due to his suspension. Raven missed the shows due to his leg injury. Van Dam and Rhino missed the June 16th show in Salem, New Hampshire due to travel connection problems and Dreamer, in street clothes, just did a run-in at the end of the Lynn Corino match, so Anton vs. Tao and Lynn vs. Corino were the top 2 matches on the show which left some feeling disappointed. The June 16th TNN show was taped from Pittsburgh. The open was a longer version of the Gertner/Cyrus feud as they went back and forth with Gertner telling him to suck him. Finally, just as the fight was about to break out, Rhino speared Gertner. Cyrus was putting the boots to him until Styles made the save. Styles, doing a karate stance, was about to fight Cyrus until Corino grabbed him. Dreamer made the save until Rhino pounded him from behind. Rhino was holding him when Credible wielded a cane. Dreamer ducked and Credible hit Rhino, which ended up being the focal point of the entire show. They beat down Dreamer again until Van Dam showed up and cleaned house. Anton and Van Dam squared off until Van Dam did a big dive. They did a couple of segments where Rhino and Credible were about to go at it with Cyrus and Francine as the peacemakers. Gertner went out in an ambulance. They explained Sandman's missing the taping because of his suspension, saying he was also in the hospital. When Gertner was going out, Cyrus explained he had an object in his anus and needed it probed. Anyway, they finally had the first match, Kid Cash beating Easy Money in 5:30. Money was making his TV debut. He's got trunks too small with money coming out. He's actually got a lot of potential as a worker but desperately needs a new ring outfit, or if he wants to keep this one, he needs to trim down because there's nothing worse than a blubbery stripper character. He's been around for some time as he used to be known as Steve Skyfire dating back to Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Cash looked great, as he usually does. He did a flip dive over the post. Money did a cool looking powerbomb type maneuver. Chris Hamrick interfered delivering a high leg drop off the top. Cash did a tremendous double springboard hurricane rana and one with a double underhook dropped into a pile driver. Pulled the Money Maker. So the guy named Money got beat by the Money Maker. Hamrick attacked Cash afterwards and Money hit Cash with a perfect moonsault before New Jack ran in and did the same run-in he always does. Hamrick bled bad for it. He finished with a crutch to Money's groin and a guitar shot on Hamrick. They did a skit with Whipwreck, Mahoney and the Sinister Minister. Whipwreck was humming a tune and Minister talked about Mikey being such a good hummer. Prodijet then came from under the table like she was giving him head and said her name wasn't Mikey. Everyone started laughing hysterically. It's amazing what does and doesn't make the air. Actually, that's the most interesting part of Nitro and ECW these days. Credible beat Lynn in 12:39 to keep the title. Credible juiced early. Their typical very good TV match. They did a lot of good near falls. The only negative is the match had too much similarity as to the near falls that Raven and Credible did in their TV match, although this was a better match. Jazz interfered. Lynn kicked out of the spinning tombstone. The network took Francine to the back. Ref bump. Lynn hit his cradle pile driver but no ref. Rhino went to spear Credible, who leapfrogged him, and Rhino instead speared Lynn through a table. At this point it got really bad because right at the climax of the match, which is the point the entire TV show built to, TNN filled the screen with a promo for the Arena Football League game that was starting, so we missed the pinfall and post-match after seeing the entire match. Some of the time TNN edits ECW, it's probably to their advantage because they come off to the average person. Actually this may not be germane because it's doubtful that many average people even watch ECW on TNN, and to their loyal audience, they've trained them that TNN is the enemy both in angle and reality who is the cause of their lack of upward mobility, as whining and complaining about the network. As mentioned before, not that their real points aren't valid, but all the knocks about the ratings of other shows on the same network whose ratings are only slightly lower than ECW's comes off really bad. But the way the editing was done of the finish was totally unnecessary and was a total slap in the face to everyone watching the show. ECW, as far as the editing of their television, has its most valid bone to pick after this finish. ECW will be releasing 3 videos that are set to hit the streets on August 29th. ECW Extreme Evolution will contain 4 matches from 1999 Hardcore Heaven plus other matches. ECW Extreme Evolution Uncensored will contain all violent matches headlined by Raven vs. Sandman in a barbed wire match. The DVD will also contain a lot of violent matches, but the lineup hasn't been released. Paul Heyman's description of the Sandman Jack Victory altercation from 2 weeks ago was that Sandman had Victory's eyes while Victory gave Sandman a few very hard headbutts while both were in a bathroom before Sal E. Graziano got in the room and was so big and took up so much space that the fight ended. WCW. Nitro on June 19 from Billings, Montana drew 5,096 fans, which was 4,319 paying $111,875. The show opened with the compelling scene of Horace in the ring sitting in a chair demanding a match with Goldberg. He said he was standing up for family pride because Hulk was injured. Didn't Horace and Hulk over the past few years turn on each other something like 1,000,000 times? Including just a few weeks back. The Ernest Miller Show stated Goldberg was too busy and it would only take 1 minute. Aren't the heels not supposed to tell the truth? Nash and Scott Steiner came out with Midaja. Steiner challenged Cat again, but Cat instead gave him a title match with Jarrett. Nash said he wanted Hall's contract. Didn't Russo rip it up 6 days ago? Oh yeah, that was off TV so it didn't happen. Anyway, it set up Nash versus Cat for Hall's contract. Palumbo and Stasiak tried to play a trick on Abbott and Rick Steiner, but they ended up getting out of the production truck and beaten up again. 3 Count beat Young Dragons in 3:55 with a triple team pancake on Jamie San, and Karagias got the pin. This was the best match on Nitro that didn't involve Flair since, well, the last time these teams wrestled each other on Nitro. Storm debuted and cleaned house on all of them with missile drop kicks and a running flip dive. He looked good athletically, then he ran away in the crowd with Scott Hudson giving the most overused line in WCW history about him not even working for us. It was a great line when Jim Ross said it in 1989 about the new Midnight Express. For a company that has spent the last 10 weeks booking for internet marks, the line was a contradiction, being the website not only announced Storm's signing but already has his bio up. Vito beat Johnny the Bull in 4:14 with an implant DDT off a scaffolding through a table to keep the hardcore title. The entire match was backstage. It was the same overdone stuff, but they worked very hard. The segment ended with Funk seemingly taking Johnny under his wing. Kanyon came out as Page, challenging anyone. Earlier in the show, G.I. Bro told the Misfits they would have to go on without him with Captain Rection as their leader. Actually, he didn't even want to say Captain Rection. He then at this point attacked Kanyon and they had a hot brawl with him taking off his military clothes and I guess becoming Booker T again. Well, it was best to cut losses because that gimmick had career killer written all over it, and nobody knows firsthand more about that than Terry Taylor. Goldberg pinned Horace in 2:37. Goldberg got by far the biggest babyface pop of the show. Nash pinned Miller in 2:37 with a powerbomb. Miller sold the single worst clothesline ever on Nitro, and imagine how much that takes in. Miller kept trying to waive the no run-in rule, but whenever he'd say wave and before no run-ins, Nash would pound on him to stop talking. That was funny. They handcuffed a briefcase to Mark Madden, who, if you notice, never puts over any babyfaces except Steiner and Nash. Nash got the briefcase, but there was no Hall contract, only photos of Miller. Goldberg then was on the screen saying he'd fight Nash for Hall's contract at the pay-per-view. Goldberg then ate Hall's contract. After the match, Miller was running in the stands and it appeared he attacked a fan. I think it was a plant, but the camera switched away from him really fast. The contract has been ripped up and it's been consumed and shitted out, sort of like Hall's career of late. In a three-way for the Cruiser title, Lieutenant Loco won over 70% Mysterio and 100% Artist. 70% Mysterio is still 3 times as good as 100% Artist. Loco pinned Artist with the Tornado DDT in 2:22 in a match which wasn't good. Paisley, Tigress and Major Guns all hit the ring. They had a pull apart. As soon as it threatened to be perversely entertaining, they cut to a commercial. David Flair begged for Daphne to take him back. Finally she agreed. He then told her to meet him in the hotel room. He then started making out with Miss Hancock. Daphne was watching on the monitor. I think everyone in the wrestling business should realize Big Brother is watching every move. Wasn't David Flair this completely insane deranged psycho son of Vince Russo with a crowbar or a statue 7 days ago? Now he's a smooth-talking ladies' man acting like he's the son of Ric Flair. Stasiak and Palumbo beat Abbott and Rick Steiner when Abbott chased a plant through the crowd, leaving Steiner by himself, and they gave him a double flapjack for the pin to keep the tag titles in 4:42. Dale Torborg, who has undergone a major charisma bypass operation, came out with Asya. The deal is that the Demon is this character he's trying to lose. Kind of like Bruce Banner and the Hulk. He's this guy who wants to lead a normal life, but when he gets mad he turns into this terrible wrestler called Demon. Now think about this. We're supposed to believe this guy wants to be normal, and in the next breath we're told he's engaged to this woman who looks like Asya. Vampiro then called them out. They played hocus pocus. With the lights out and Asya was gone, the lights out and Vampiro was gone, and then Vampiro was driving a car while Torborg looked confused. Bagwell and Chronic beat Triple Threat in 6:20 when Bagwell pinned Bigelow. Condito came out with his arm in a sling and it wasn't part of an angle and he just stood in the corner. Do you know how ridiculous it makes wrestling look when you have a participant with his arm in a sling and it isn't part of an angle? Anyway, Jarrett beat Scott Steiner in the main event in 9/11 of a good match. Awesome was ref and kept helping out Jarrett, but Steiner was kicking out of everything. He used the recliner on Jarrett, but Miller at ringside told Awesome to break it up because it was a choke. Steiner put the hold on Awesome and Jarrett hit him with a guitar for the pin. Steiner suplexed Miller after and beat up on everyone in sight until Goldberg came out and speared him. Nash ran in for the save and beat on everyone except Goldberg, who jumped out of the ring. Johnny Ace was backstage at Nitro helping with finishes. Condito showed up for TV with a broken wrist. More notes regarding the June 13th tapings in Norfolk, Virginia. The tag team match was Mark Jindrak and Sean O'Hare over Mike Sanders and Alan Funk. 3 Count actually beat Cassidy O'Reilly and Air Paris and James Stone, members of the Ranby security team, and not Young Dragons, who were their scheduled opponents but weren't there, as written. There was a ton of backstage tension. Kimberly wasn't at the show. As the story goes, she quit the promotion because Scott Steiner the previous night called her a nasty name when Steiner found out she wouldn't do a physical angle involving him. So instead Kimberly did that legendary angle where she went to spray the perfume in Hancock's eyes but sprayed in the wrong direction, and she sold it anyway. Steiner said it thinking she wasn't there, but she heard it and wanted an apology, and you know how that goes, and she quit. Many people are under the assumption it's a work given DDP and Eric Bischoff's friendship and the company's fascination with trying to fool the internet rather than working on their bottom line. It may not be. And either way, there have been a lot of comparisons of Kimberly with Rena Mero among some wrestlers. Originally Candido and Bigelow were supposed to beat Chronic clean, but there were complaints and the result was changed. Their first match, which didn't air, saw Candido take too long to get the turnbuckle pad off and they ended up having the refs destroyed for a no contest. Brian Clark in particular was furious backstage and after a few minutes, Bischoff ordered them to redo the match after the regular taping ended. In the redone match, Bigelow was barely in. Douglas, Bigelow and Candido reformed the triple threat. Douglas told management that he owned the name and not ECW. Scott Hall's voice was also supposed to be on the show in the Nash phone call. However, when it came time to do the skit and they called Hall's home, he wasn't there, so they had to do the angle where they pretended Hall was there. Naturally, Hall should return in a few weeks. Mark Madden replaced Bobby Heenan due to Heenan's wife being ill. The Bash at the Beach pay-per-view on July 9th in Daytona Beach has sold about 2,000 tickets. It'll probably sell out because they are going to cut capacity in the building back to 5,000 seats. In the New York Daily News TV section this past week, they ran an article listing the highest-rated non-wrestling shows on cable. They listed Nitro as third. Kim Kenner, Shakira, has some heat because she refused to go to the power plant to learn to take bumps because the contract she signed wasn't for a role that involved taking physical punishment. She was called on June 15th by Terry Taylor and told her services were no longer needed. Her initial stance was apparently somewhat from advice from Nash and Steiner, looking for this as a way to get a raise since her job description had changed. Steiner in particular was said to be unhappy with her being taken off the show. It's amazing reading the Muscle magazines because they have so much funny wrestling gossip, because of the various female characters running around, from Nicole Bass on the Indies to all the WCW women who are noted fitness models. One Muscle mag out there in its swimsuit issue not only had the WCW women, headlined by Wilson, but even Chive the Nitro Girls under her real name. Muscle Mag International claimed that Wilson had broken up with her fiancé and boyfriend of a number of years dating back to their days in Idaho for Kidman. They edited out most of Nash's interview from Deliverance, including such profane lines as "You've got pretty lips" and "squeal like a pig," which is far more tame than much of what gets through in today's wrestling. Kanyon doing the DDP impersonation was the most entertaining thing on the entire show. The crowd cutaways in the Daphne Hancock angle is because Daphne breasts fell out of her dress. It's amazing, in the Filthy Animals, with Conan in the group, that the one who gets the mic time is Tigress, who is so bad. La Parca Psicosis, Silver King, Dandy, Lodi, Barbarian and Los Villanos were all let go by WCW. I know that Parca and Psicosis will be available as free agents on July 5th. ECW has already expressed interest in Psicosis, who did very well there in 1995 with some amazing matches. His ECW matches were far better than any of his WCW matches, before going to WCW. It wouldn't shock me to see some or all of the Mexican contingent get involved in the racial discrimination lawsuit against WCW, which in a sense makes the timing strange. At the same time, WCW is feeling strongly about its chances in the suit because they are only using a few dozen performers, with a handful of both African Americans and Latino performers appearing regularly. For evidence with people like Garza and Psicosis who had a chance in the US but were buried, WCW can argue indiscriminate incompetence because there are plenty of people like Jerry Lynn or Chris Jericho that weren't Japanese or Mexican that also showed elsewhere that they should have been pushed to a higher level. There will be a 10-day tour of Australia in October. Great Muta didn't appear on the June 19th Nitro due to visa problems but is expected to appear on June 26th. In regards to the angle where Vampiro gave Asia the nail in the coffin, he was dead set against doing it all afternoon. It sounds funny given that he had just supposedly lit a man on fire and tossed him 40 feet to his apparent death. Apparently there is a history of physical abuse of females in his family and didn't want to be on television doing something that somewhat glorifies it. Bischoff convinced him to do it as a team player, so he did. The last plan was for Tori Wilson to resurface as the valet of Hulk Hogan. What a shock. Speaking of Wilson, she's all over the Muscle magazines as the current hot fitness cover woman and in swimsuit pictorials in several of the magazines at once. But if you were a fan of WCW on TV, you'd have no idea that was even the case. For the Great American Bash in Baltimore, the merchandise figure was $30,076. There are front office employees looking to bail and transfer out of WCW so they can remain with Time Warner employee status in case the company is sold. We're told a number of employees have asked to be reassigned within the Time Warner company. Sting is scheduled to be out for 1 month. They want him to return with a new look, which is probably another old look, which he's against. WCW was originally going to push the A&E special hard, but the promo piece A&E sent them for usage contained references to Hogan's career hitting a slide due to steroid allegations, so they ran from pushing the show hard and wouldn't air the promo piece. On the angle where Flair got his head shaved, the original scripted plan was just for Russo to shave the back of his head. I believe it was Flair who suggested going all the way with it, being that shaving the back of his head really wouldn't have meant much, and the whole deal is probably about the only angle that could possibly draw money. Still, it would have been better had it been Russo ordering someone. Douglas would have been okay, and Goldberg actually would have been the best to shave the head so that there was a way to actually draw long-term money with it. With Russo, he isn't going to wrestle on house shows, not that there are hardly any, so it'll mean nothing there. You could put a match with Flair versus Russo on pay-per-view, but I don't think it'll mean much. You may pop one TV quarter hour for a Flair versus Russo match, but realistically, only one, and with Russo's current situation, it could be that Flair sacrificed his one last great angle, and it will be one of those open-ended angles with no conclusion. With Goldberg, there are ways to do the program that would help everyone over the long haul, although that also would require Goldberg selling big for Flair's comebacks after dominating the matches. The main thing is that Goldberg would come out of it as a better worker and they'd have a program with big-time heat going in, but since it didn't happen, that's all a moot point. Thunder will be airing on the Liberty Livewire delivery system for internet simulcast of the show every Wednesday night. There is a lot of internal conflict because everyone was instructed not to use the word ass on Thunder, but on June 13th, it was used 11 times. Russo's blow-ups with standards and practices, which he'll probably use as a crutch when the inevitable major bloodletting takes place, included S&P being against the deliverance angle because in the movie, the angle regarded sodomization. The reason squeal like a pig when said by Nash was sound edited off and purty lips was because those were terms in the movie pertaining to sodomization. Yoshihiro Asai, Ultimo Dragon, was in Atlanta this past week working on an out-of-court settlement on his claim of suffering a career-ending injury due to a botched-up operation by the WCW physician. Those who spoke with him said his physical condition has still shown no sign of improvement and he's regained no new feeling in his hand, so it still appears his career is over. I believe Len Carlson, Lenny Lane, has secretly resigned with WCW. WCW merchandise continues to sell poorly. The Goldberg turn resulted in zero increase in sales of New Blood merchandise, which was a hope for byproduct. Although for that to happen, Goldberg would have to be wearing the shirt at all opportunities, something that has yet to happen. Goldberg merchandise was by far the company's best seller, with nobody a close second, and there was some question regarding the turn because the end result would be expected to be disastrous for the merchandising department. Goldberg did suffer a concussion from the chair shot from Rick Steiner on June 5. Ric Flair's rotator cuff surgery was scheduled for June 20th. Depending on the extent of the injury, he could be out anywhere from 2 to 4 months. Jimmy Hart hasn't been on TV at least partially because he tore ligaments in his knee during the Mancow match at the March pay-per-view, and he'll be out 3 months. Kidman missed Nitro because he was moving, which may also be why Tori Wilson missed the show, although since her next planned role is with Hogan and he's doing an injury angle, with no Kidman on the show nor Hogan, there was no storyline point in her being there. Johnny Ace was brought in this week to help put together finishes on Nitro. Bischoff wasn't in Los Angeles working on a deal on June 19th. He was in Billings, Montana but didn't want to appear on camera. Mysterio Jr. is said to be at about 70% right now. He can't risk trying anything spectacular. He'd returned about 5 weeks early because he was asked to do what he could do and because of the half-pay situation if he couldn't wrestle. The performers who appear on television weekly but aren't participating in wrestling matches still can have their pay cut in half if they are injured for a lengthy period of time. Conan's MRI diagnosis was worse than expected as his tricep was 90% torn off the bone, literally almost hanging by a thread. He'll undergo surgery shortly, most likely in Birmingham from Dr. James Andrews, and will probably be out of the ring after surgery from 3 to 6 months. That eliminates the planned Conan vs. Kidman Street Fight match from the next pay-per-view. Bret Hart underwent a battery of tests on June 13th and June 14th, with brain specialists in Montreal. They are hopeful in the next week or two that they'll come to an answer as to exactly what his problem is and a definite timetable regarding if he can or can't return. On June 15th, Thursday, in the international version of USA Today there was a full-page ad with a photo of Goldberg, which read, "He's back Monday Nitro, watch it tonight on TNT." That's a nice waste of $50,000. One of the reasons things will always have a nearly impossible time building for the future is that when Brad Siegel replaced Bill Bush with Bischoff and Russo, he said the company wasn't willing to wait for results while they rebuilt, but wanted results immediately, which is also why nerves are frayed because it was going to be very difficult to pull that off. Thunder on June 13th in Norfolk, Virginia drew 5,560 fans, which was 3,231 paying $69,840. WWF. In the King of the Ring main event, the tips are that if the Undertaker and Rock and Kane team wins, the one who scores the pin wins the title. If the McMahons and Triple H team wins, which everyone assumes to be the case, then the winner of the King of the Ring tournament gets the title shot at Triple H on the July pay-per-view. I can see them breaking off Rock vs. Undertaker as the real main event, or maybe a three-way involving Kane, single since they've been building for it for weeks, and then putting Triple H against either Kane, Rikishi, Jericho, or Benoit, or Angle, the latter being the one the betting line is stating. Triple H is already teasing the face turn and Angle is in line for a major heel push. The June 25th show besides the six-man will be a Tables and Dumpsters 2-on-3 match with Road Dogg and X-Pac and Tori vs. Dudley's, a tag title match which will be a four-way with Too Cool vs. Edge and Christian vs. Tanda vs. Hardy's, an evening gown match with Pat Patterson vs. Gerald Briscoe for the Hardcore title and the tournament. The bracketing of the tournament first round based on the bracketing on Thursday on SmackDown and on the website is Rikishi vs. Benoit, Venus vs. Guerrero, Angle vs. Jericho and Buchanan vs. Crash Holly. I think it's a lock that Angle goes to the final out of the bottom bracket against either Rikishi or Benoit. Taz can return and cost Benoit the match with Rikishi, or Benoit can win, get hurt in the process, squeak by Guerrero while selling big, and then attempt to be turned total face against Angle in the finals. On Raw, they showed no bracketing nor pushed any of the natural matchups based on who won, and took the bracketing down on the website, which means they probably were thinking of rearranging everything from the original plans. We were told after Tuesday's TV that the plans at this point are still to go with the original bracketing. Rock vs. Undertaker correctly positioned should be a healthy main event, and the Triple H title match then can be used to elevate someone new to that level. NBC officially purchased the WWFE stock and signed for television broadcast rights to the XFL on June 13th in the deal that had been announced some months back. NBC purchased 3.3% of the WWFE for $30 million, or a price of $13 per share, well under the going rate of $18.38 for the stock as of its close on June 14th. Raw on June 19th in Nashville drew a sellout 13,269 paying $381,948. Show had some good wrestling early but ended weaker than usual. Angle beat Bubba Ray Dudley in 4:41 with the Olympic Slam. Really good match, in fact it was the best match on the show, which is saying something with a Benoit X-Pac match on the same card. They had this funny deal where Patterson and Briscoe came with a fax for Vince, and when they gave it to him, Briscoe told Vince that his wife was the CEO of the company. As if they needed to remind him of that. Faction did an interview while Vince was in the ring reading. Vince got mad at the fax and said that if his team loses at the pay-per-view, that whomever scores the pin gets Triple H's belt, which Triple H was furious about, and they nearly came to blows. First, though, all three would have to win handicap matches later in the show. He also said there could be no interference in any of those matches. Benoit beat X-Pac in 4:50 when the Dudleys distracted. X-Pac went for the X-Factor, but Benoit blocked it and turned it into a crossface. Another good match. Dudleys went to attack X-Pac after, but Road Dogg and Tori came out and left them laying with Tori putting the boots to Bubba. Guerrero pinned Chyna in 2:25 with an inside cradle. Guerrero wouldn't punch her and she wouldn't give him a low blow. She pouted after losing. He tried to give her flowers but she wouldn't stop pouting. Finally he gave her a puppy so she got happy. Whenever you see a cute puppy on wrestling, you know he's either going to be stolen or eaten. Jericho beat Edge in 5:28 with the walls. Another good match. Unfortunately, that was it for the show. Undertaker beat Buchanan and Bossman in a handicap match in 3:08 with a choke slam on Buchanan when Bossman turned on him. Undertaker has aged terribly of late and looked like Nash's much older brother. They showed a clip of Ventura in the crowd from Minneapolis and said if he ran for president, he'd want Chyna as his running mate. He said she'd bring in the women's vote. I could almost hear Don Callis on ECW saying they need Chyna to appeal to the all-important 300-pound bench-pressing women demographic. Rikishi beat Scotty 2 Hotty with the Banzai in 2:52. Venus attacked Rikishi after. Too Cool tried to make the save but they got punked. Kane beat Hardy's in a handicap match in 6:19 pinning Matt with a choke slam. This was about as good as it could have possibly been given all the clashes out there. Jeff slipped off the ropes and hit his head on the mat trying a moonsault right at the finish and looked shaken up. Triple H started screaming at Stephanie that her dad was screwing everything up. Stephanie was beginning to notice that Triple H was a crybaby. Crash Holly beat Bob Holly via DQ in 4:17 when Briscoe attacked Crash. After the match, Briscoe pinned Crash to win the hardcore title. After Crash lost, then Bob decked him as well. Backstage they did a celebration, and Patterson broke a bottle over Briscoe's head and pinned him so Patterson captured his first title belt since his legendary tag team with Pierre Lefebvre during the Carter administration. Triple H and Stephanie started telling Test and Albert what they needed to do. Test still didn't like Triple H for stealing his fiancée, although they dropped the program like a hot potato. Triple H pie-faced Andrew. Rock won the handicap bout with a people's elbow on Andre in 6:05. For the tapings on June 20th in Memphis before a sellout of close to 18,000 paying more than $400,000. In dark matches, Mean Street Posse beat Dopes and Joe E. Legend. Scott Vick pinned Tracy Smothers. For Heat, Rios pinned Richards. Acolytes beat Saturn and Brown. Saturn's shoulders weren't down for the pin. This was noticed so they made them go out later and redo the match. Bob Holly pinned Gangrel. Midian beat Mosh. Acolytes beat Saturn and Brown again. This time Saturn's shoulders were down when Farouk pinned him the exact same way. SmackDown opened with a faction interview. Shane and Triple H walked out on Vince for his proclaiming the title could change hands in the six-man. Tanda and Stratus beat Hardys and Lita when Albert gave Lita the neck-hanging tree slam and put Stratus on top for the pin. Grandmaster, in his hometown, pinned Christian when Scotty hit him with the ring bell. Christian and Edge were both dressed up like Fat Elvises. Bossman beat Guerrero via DQ in a European title match. Venus interfered hitting Guerrero with the nightstick. Bossman punched Chyna in the face and she then hit Bossman with a belt which the ref saw for the DQ. Patterson was backstage dressed in women's clothing. Rikishi pinned Benoit to win the IC title with the Banzai Clean. Too Cool and Rikishi celebrated. Benoit hits all three with chair shots and puts Rikishi in the crossface. It started as Michinoku and Kat versus Terry and Malenko. Michinoku was taken out for Lawler to come out of his commentary chair to team with his girlfriend in his hometown. Crowd went nuts chanting for Lawler. Terry gave Lawler a Bronco Buster. Kat kicked Malenko low and gave Terry a Bronco Buster. Kat then gave Lawler a Bronco Buster as well and pinned Terry. Road Dogg and X-Pac beat Dudley with X-Pac using X-Factor on Devon. After the bout, Dudley's gave the 3D to ring announcer Tony Chamel. Jericho beat Bob Holly. Stephanie cried and threw a fit with Jericho winning. Patterson and Briscoe started fighting in the women's bathroom. Vince got mad and ordered them to fight in an evening gown match on the pay-per-view. Rock and Undertaker and Kane had to run the gauntlet. First they beat DX and Buchanan. Then they beat Edge and Christian and Angle. Then they beat Tanda and Venus. All nine then attacked Undertaker and Kane, leaving Rock alone against the McMahons and Triple H. Triple H gave Rock a pedigree. Shane came off the top with an elbow and finally Vince pinned Rock with a people's elbow and Vince forced Earl Hebner to make the count. Kane went through a table. After the cameras were off, Rock gave Shane and Triple H people's elbows and rock bottoms. Expect Birmingham and Memphis to be the two cities announced this week for the two remaining XFL franchises. Sky Sports in the UK has listed its WWF programming as its top priority behind the Premier Division Soccer. Raw is the highest-rated weekly show on the station. Some Premier Division Soccer games and some NFL football games draw higher ratings, but not as a weekly show in a certain time slot, and Raw's ratings are more consistent week to week. They specifically said at a staff meeting that Raw was more important to the station than boxing, rugby, golf and everything else except the Premier Division Soccer. They said at the meeting they didn't regard WWF putting 4 of its pay-per-view shows on Channel 4 as a big deal, and noted that they are airing on a 1-hour tape delay, so they can edit out questionable material as well as insert commercials, so they don't end until 5 a.m. Monday morning. Sky Sports will no longer edit WWF as far as violent or sexual content unless it is considered over the top, and will only edit storylines of a satanic nature, since the ITC, which regulates all television, comes down hard on that subject. Management specifically okayed swearing and man-on-woman fighting. In regards to the banning of the moves as written about last week, there was no memo given wrestlers. Some wrestlers have been pulled aside and told not to do this or that. In a similar vein, McMahon told Guerrero not to do the frog splash, which is why he's using the Hurricane Rana as his finisher. Guerrero is willing and actually would like to do it, but McMahon doesn't want to risk his elbow going out and him being on the shelf again. Guerrero was shaken up on June 13 on the Heat match, taking a bad bump doing his Hurricane Rana finisher on Malenko. Malenko missed Raw because of a shoulder injury that he's going to have checked out later in the week. He had worked the weekend house shows. Mike Palpacek, Bart Gunn Mike Barton, was backstage, no doubt, checking out his options due to the All Japan situation. Current plan is for Regal to start in about 6 weeks and probably work a program with whomever the European champion would be at the time. Booking of minor titles can change weekly, but the plan was for a Regal Guerrero feud as of last week. The difference between WWF now and 1 year ago is that 1 year ago, Regal would have kidnapped China's dog and served it to her for dinner to get the feud going, and somehow I don't see it quite like that his year due to the sponsorship pressure. Some notes from the licensing fair in New York from June 13 to June 15. On the first day, Hogan and Jarrett were there for WCW. Hogan and Goldberg both had to do a deal where they marked out for Pikachu, the Pokemon monster. Mick Foley, with a shaved head, was there also the first day for WWF along with members of their racing team, as was Ivory and Billy Gunn. On June 14, the big confrontation with Goldberg and Triple H and Stephanie took place. Triple H had considerably longer lines. Goldberg, who doesn't like Triple H because Triple H made what was one of the dumber statements made by a wrestler in the media of the year, basically portraying Goldberg as akin to a one-hit wonder. One can argue that's a valid point, but then said if Goldberg were available that he doesn't think McMahon would even want him. Goldberg has been hot at him since that time. Anyway, he started yelling at Triple H, although he was never actually close to him, putting him down and looking mad while Triple H was sitting there laughing about it. At TNN's booth, there was no mention of wrestling at all. Fox Kids pushed its Los Luchadores show we wrote about last week. The experiment of running both Raw and SmackDown in the same building, the America West Arena in Phoenix with shows on September 11th and September 12th, appears already to be a big success. After Raw sold out in 90 minutes, they put tickets on sale on June 16th for SmackDown, and they sold out the first day. Part of the reason is Phoenix is WWF hungry, as due to routing reasons, there aren't a lot of major cities geographically close to Phoenix. They haven't run the city since January 1999. But this opens up the ideas of running TV in the same building for two-night stands in the future, which has some major advantages, such as saving money on setup costs and wear and tear and stress on all the wrestlers and front office personnel as well as the ring crew because of not having to travel to a new city and a new hotel on Tuesday of that week. I haven't heard of any examples, but I'd be willing to bet this is tried again. Plenty of major sports franchises play consecutive home games, and many touring concert acts or the circus run the same building on consecutive nights, so there is no reason this shouldn't work. Although traditionally in wrestling when it has been tried, it hasn't been successful outside of Japan. WWF has run 2 consecutive nights successfully in the same major television market, such as Madison Square Garden and Nassau Coliseum or the Anaheim Pond and Los Angeles or San Jose and San Francisco, but in the past they had never tried it in the same arena or in a market the size of Phoenix. According to the WWF, there was no plan to introduce Stu Hart to the crowd or have him walk to the ring with Davey Boy Smith on the May 27th house show in Calgary. The plan, according to a WWF official, was for Diana Smith, Stu's daughter and Davey's wife, to come out with him, but that didn't materialize since they are having problems. Bruce Hart had told the WWF he was going to bring Stu to the show, which also didn't happen, and you know how that went. Stu was at Keith Hart's house that day when they went to pick him up. The reason he was at Keith's house was because of the feeling Stu would be talked into walking Davey to the ring and because of the lawsuit. Stu, who is suing WWF, appearing before the public at a WWF event would become something probably involved in the suit or at least a media issue in the market. Jim Neidhart was sent back to Calgary from Memphis where he wasn't working out in his role of a trainer and coach. Officially, they're keeping Neidhart on payroll, and one suspects that means he'll testify if need be in the trial, with his new job to scout Stampede Wrestling and the local indies for any talent that shows promise. Big Show is expected back in a few weeks. It wasn't ruled out 100% that he wouldn't make a run-in at King of the Ring, but the chances were against it happening. At press time he wasn't released, but that was expected in a few weeks. Before starting back on television, the plan is to send him to Louisville to work out and get the kinks out, some conditioning and his timing back. He isn't expected to appear at any OVW shows while in Louisville but is expected to train with the OVW wrestlers. Mick Foley shaved his head, so he isn't quite as noticeable in public. There is no exact time frame, but the plan still seems to be at some point for Linda McMahon to bring him in as commissioner. He's doing tons of autograph sessions and PR appearances and will referee at the Ohio Valley Wrestling Show on June 23. He also has a WWF tour of Southeast Asia planned and is writing a Christmas book for kids, which the artwork is being done by Lawler. Expect Angle's character to be slightly less comedy-oriented and more of a serious, darker heel as a way to have him taken more seriously for a higher on the card spot. Mick Foley's book is number 9 in the bestseller list in Australia. China was on Jay Leno on June 16. She talked about breaking an implant in a match and that she does the backflips because Austin dared her to do it. The grand opening of the WWF New York nightclub is set for June 23. Guerrero was actually shaken up at SmackDown, cracking heads with Malenko, and had a knot on his head and was suffering from headaches during the week but was back in action over the weekend. Malenko has been working the past few weeks with a tear in his shoulder. He was in a great deal of pain with it, but it was bothering him more on certain weightlifting movements than it was doing matches. He's expected to undergo an MRI after television this week and, depending on the results, may miss some action. Godfather was out of action this week with an ankle injury. Taz should be back very soon. Grandmasters Sexay and Tori have signed contract extensions. Mike Tierney, whose WWF developmental deal wasn't renewed, has retired from wrestling and is moving to Texas for a job in architecture. WWF Aggression was down to number 130 on the charts, having sold 10,883 units. Joe E. Legend's real name is Joe Hitchin, not Hilkin as we've printed. WWF has signed developmental deals with Basil Bozini's, who does the spear at the beginning of the Pro Football vs. Pro Wrestler Tough Man contest match, Justin McCulley, who has done some shoot fights in Japan with rings as well as some pro wrestling with New Japan, Aaron Aguilera, and John Cena, all based out of Southern California. The Oscar de la Hoya vs. Shane Mosley fight on June 17 blew away even the WrestleMania numbers. The estimated 800,000 buys, roughly the same as Mania, adds up to a $40 million pay-per-view gross, the second biggest in history for a non-heavyweight boxing championship match. And the live gate at the Staples Center of 20,774 generated an all-time California boxing box office live gate record of $8 million. Karen Muffy is still under contract, but they haven't come up with a new role for her. I guess they dropped the idea of her being Stephanie's personal trainer for obvious reasons. John Layfield, Bradshaw, filmed a role for a USA Network movie last week. SmackDown tapings June 13 in Chicago at the Allstate Arena drew a sellout 13,036, paying $377,360, making 13 consecutive sellouts for WWF in that building. June 17 in Minneapolis drew 14,521, paying $384,433. They did a split crew on June 18 with Huntsville, Alabama drawing 5,361, paying $149,965, and Chattanooga, Tennessee drawing 5,135, paying $133,549. We didn't get complete merchandise figures for the week, but of what we did get, it was $7.86 per head, so the arena merchandise revenue should have been in the $400,000 range. In Minneapolis, they had some interesting stuff. After Malenko beat Crash, both men shook hands. Acolytes over Bossman and Buchanan ended with the same Buchanan walking out on his partner they've done ever since the turn on TV. Main event went on before intermission with Rock and Dudley's over DX. Jesse Ventura was at ringside and decided to play heel, and some reports say he took a lot of the heat in the match away from the participants. Ventura got 60% boos at first, but by the time he was done he got 100% boos. It was interesting because when ECW was in Minneapolis and Ventura's name was mentioned in a spot where fans should have booed the heel for running down Ventura, it sounded like at least 50% cheered. Ventura and Brock Lesnar were both introduced to the crowd. It appeared that 1/3 of the audience left after seeing Rock, even though it was only 8:30 p.m. at the time his match was over. Angle also got a babyface pop coming out but turned the crowd with his mic work. Rikishi was still using the Rikishi driver as his finisher this weekend, even though he's supposed to start using a new finisher. On June 18 in Huntsville, Alabama, they did a split show with Undertaker and Kane over Bossman and Buchanan as the main event. Undertaker barely tagged in. Buchanan hit Bossman with the nightstick and walked out, leaving him to be pinned. Since they had a split crew, they actually had a match with Gangrel over Brooklyn Brawler managed by Harvey Whippleman. Radio ads for the show listed names such as Triple H Show, who is out with a legit injury, Rikishi, Road Dogg, and Godfather, who didn't appear. In Chattanooga, they had Rikishi over Triple H via DQ and Road Dogg and X-Pac over Dudley's as the top 2 matches. The readers' pages. Unionization. I've read over the years how Jesse Ventura and Bret Hart have thrown out the idea of creating a union for the industry. Yet they were, or are, afraid of the consequences facing them from the promoters. Every time a state legislature wishes to drug test his athletes, Vince McMahon extols that his company is nothing more than a cast of performers. He says if they were to test his ensemble, they should test all the actors on Broadway. That being the case, wouldn't it make sense for the Screen Actors Guild to incorporate the performers of the pro wrestling world? Even legitimate professional athletes have come under fire for shooting commercials for their sponsors during a SAG strike. Sports entertainers work on television. They work on the stage, house shows. Don't Broadway performers have a union? I'm under the impression that actors can't work on TV, movies or commercials unless they are part of one union or another. How has wrestling slipped through the cracks? Jay Myszkowski. Winnipeg, Manitoba. If you think WCW is a mess now, it could only get worse with a union. And the WWF and ECW would follow. Assuming that a wrestling union would operate like other American unions, we can look forward to the following. 1. The older wrestlers would protect their spots and not allow younger wrestlers to move up no matter how talented they are. See WCW. 2. The younger wrestlers would have to hold back and not work too hard so that the older wrestlers would either look bad or have to actually work hard. That happens now and in the past, but it would get much worse. 3. A promoter would not be allowed to push wrestlers based on ability or drawing power. See Jeff Jarrett. 4. When times got tough, the wrestlers with the least seniority, regardless of talent, would be fired. See WCW. 5. Foreign wrestlers would not be allowed to be hired because they would be taking American jobs. Not quite WCW, but the end result is the same as Vince Russo's vision. I guess WCW has an unofficial union. The wrestlers just don't have to pay dues. I say some of this in jest, but it's probably not too far off the mark. I think a lot of people are for a union because they think it will make wrestling safer and more entertaining. It may make things safer, but it will never make the product more entertaining. Jason Campbell. There are many pro sports unions and entertainment unions. There are a ton of foreign actors who work regularly in this country. I don't think I have to even go into how many foreign hockey players there are in the NHL. Michael Kemp. Canyon Bump. I can't understand why Mohammad Chatra would want to criticize Jim Ross for condemning WCW for the situation at the pay-per-view with Chris Kanyon. What he fails to recognize is the fact that, at the moment Hart died, Jim Ross was only a few meters away and he watched Owen Hart die right before his eyes on a live television broadcast. If you ever see anybody you know and care about die in front of you, it is quite simply the single most terrible experience you will ever witness in your life. Seeing it happen to a perfectly healthy man in the prime of his life only adds to the grief of the matter. Any number of occurrences, some of which may often seem very trivial to an outsider, can trigger off flashbacks of the incident in the mind of a witness. For WCW to stage an angle like they did with Kanyon in the same arena 1 year later on the very day that would have been Owen Hart's 35th birthday, was insensitive and thoughtless beyond words, especially when you consider that Bret Hart is one of the company's employees. I'm not surprised at all that Ross was upset. I'm not surprised that a whole lot of people in the building were upset. What I can't understand is anyone wanting to criticize Jim Ross and turn this into a WWF versus WCW thing for giving his true feelings on the matter. By doing so, they are belittling the magnitude of the incident that took the life of one of wrestling's great entertainers. And for those who still want to defend WCW's actions, I hope that nothing like what Jim Ross witnessed in Kansas City is ever witnessed by you. Denias. Saturday in Brighton, England. Funk Condito. In this past week's issue, there is a story that you interplayed. The match you spoke of where Terry Funk wrestled in a horse stall. I read it and immediately screamed, are they out of their effing minds? Having grown up around horses, I could foresee this possibly resulting in a serious injury or a death. Obviously if Funk was kicked in the upper arm, the horse was clearly agitated or afraid. I'm sure the animal was sedated. Probably not with PCP, but with asapromazine, which is a similar chemical makeup to PCP. Just because an animal is sedated, it doesn't mean they will stay calm when provoked. I witnessed an animal with torn cartilage in an ear, on 1 cc of ACE, require 2 people to hold it, with a twitch on its nose, stud chain under the upper lip, and another person holding the good ear, just so the vet could snip the cartilage and bandage the ear. The same horse could barely lift its feet to walk back to its stall. It astounds me that relatively intelligent people could think this was a good idea. Especially after the Owen Hart death, which I don't believe was a foreseeable accident, and the pending lawsuit. I can't believe they could be this stupid. At very least, the owner of the horse should have warned them it could kick or bite. The fact it was tied up guaranteed it would lash out somehow because it couldn't run away. WCW will be really lucky if they don't hear from animal rights groups. It's really a miracle that nobody ended up in the ER. Mary White. Whether it's the clash of titans in the ring or the drama that unfolds outside it, we're here to break it down, match by match, feud by feud. Remember, in the world of wrestling, every day is a battle, and every victory is a story waiting to be told. Until next time, keep the passion alive, and never stop wrestling with the possibilities. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine,